Hello, and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher, The Philosopher and the Fool.
Okay, today I want to run through the Communist Manifesto, the entire book. It's going to be a little bit of a different episode, potentially, at least for the first half. I don't know if it'll even take the whole episode. Or maybe it'll be like Kant, where his 80-page book took us like 4 episodes.
He had a lot to think about, though.
So did the communists. They just had stupid thoughts, whereas Kant had brilliant thoughts.
Well, I mean, the communists went all over the place. Kant lived, like, if you looked at the heat map of his life after a certain point, it wasn't very diverse.
The Communist Manifesto is also a lot short. Like, if you were given it,
Yeah.
you'd think, wow, this is short, but you'd be wrong. It's even shorter than that. Because the last third of the book is dedicated to leftist infighting, where they talk about all those things that aren't real communism and how bad they are.
Okay.
This is the initial book of communism was already saying what the stupid other communists were doing wrong.
How you do communists wrong.
And I can go into some of those. Okay, so this is I got the Communist Manifesto, sat down to read it. I was like, okay, let's hear what Marx has to say. And this isn't just Marx's work. This is Marx and Engels and a bunch of other communist great thinkers working together to create the document, because what they wanted.
And like a group project, it's full of inconsistencies, apparently.
So at the start of the book, he says, a specter is haunting Europe, the specter of communism. So what happened was this idea of communism started spreading with Marx's work mostly, but Engels and whatnot. And then all the political powers of the day were like, this is stupid. And so they would be like, my opponent is a communist. So it became like how Nazi is used today.
Yeah.
That was sort of how communist was used back in Marx's time, to just completely discredit your opponent.
Right.
Well, how communist is used today as well, actually. And so this book was like, hey, you can't just call everything communist. We actually have a set of beliefs. Here they are. Bam. Yeah. So that, because they wanted to clear it up, because it was like, what's a communist? It's kind of this vague socialist idea. So that's the introduction. The first sentence of the Communist Manifesto. The history of all hitherto existing societies is the history of class struggles.
I think we've talked about how this is wrong.
Dismisses art, dismisses love, dismisses heroism, dismisses religion, dismisses
architecture.
Yeah, it's just, no, it was all class struggle.
Farming.
It's like, those pyramids, that was class struggle. That was the rich versus the poor. Freeman and slave, patrician and plebeian, lord and serf, guildmaster and journeyman. In a word, oppressor and oppressed stood in constant opposition with one another.
See, so the guildmaster and student, forever, journeyman.
Yeah.
Sort of the thought of master and student. That's not a struggle between two classes. If it's a struggle, then something's wrong there. It should be cooperation between the two.
Let's try to like steel man it, I guess. Maybe journeyman in this context, translation plus 200 years and all that. Maybe journeyman means like free, like a ungilded worker.
I think journeyman
craftsman.
Probably means the worker in the guild hall, and then the guild master gets all the money for his labor because he runs the guild hall.
Oh, I guess so. Yeah, I was thinking.
However, I mean, I don't know each individual thing, but what I do know about guilds is they're set up very fairly to the journeyman.
And so he says this constant opposition carried on an uninterrupted, now hidden, now open fight. A fight that each time ended, either in revolutionary reconstitution of society at large, or in the common ruin of the contending classes. And so, how he made this observation, it's not just out of nowhere. He said, okay, so there was a feudal system, and then the peasants revolted, and they destroyed the feudal monarchy, and the nobles became the leaders, and so you sort of got rid of the outer shell.
Yeah.
And then that was sort of your constitutional monarchy, where the nobles kept everyone in check. And then you have the nobles overthrown, and now it's the merchants are in charge. And then you have the merchants and the rich are in charge. And in Marx's time, the middle class overthrew the rich and became the dominant power.
Became the politicians.
And so then the middle class was, and the great group, and the working class was the final class, because there's nothing below the working class.
All right.
So when the working class finally overthrows the bourgeoisie, the middle class.
Yeah.
So when the proletariat finally overthrows the bourgeoisie, there will be no more revolutions, because each layer will have been tossed off, and that'll
I mean, don't you have the problem though? It's turtles all the way down. Like you could.
There'll be slaves, and there'll be
Slaves or the destitute below the working class.
right. So he has a way to resolve that.
You kill them.
No, once the working class overthrows all of society,
Yeah.
you have to destroy all concepts of property, and therefore there will be nothing left to fight over. So that's where the idea of property, because he thought of that. He's like, there's going to be working class that have more. They're going to take it from the rich. So the only way to end this endless cycle.
So under communism, then, are you not even entitled to your own body?
Well, I've talked about this before, actually, right? In the Jewish question, he talked about how he hated the Jews because the Jews said you don't have a right to other people's space.
Yeah.
And that is your autonomy, right? That is your body. So, yeah, no, you don't have a right to your body under communism. It's all for the state. The Short Fat Otaku did a great video where he said consent is deontological, where he points out that the communists are anti-consent.
Yeah, well, that's what I was thinking. I don't want to say in such words, but yeah.
But it is a necessary presupposition of communism that Marx himself states. I'm not just putting words in his mouth. He says, no, I have to be able to say, hey, you have to come here and hang out with me. We're communists.
Yeah.
He's just very lonely. Very lonely wastrel. So yeah, that thing I just talked about was the endless cycle. That's what the next couple pages are about. If I'm just quiet, that'll get truncated, right?
Yes, okay. That's why I wasn't saying anything.
Well, this will be a short little truncated. So the next bunch of pages are just dedicated to hating on the bourgeoisie.
Well, I think that's an important note, though, is hatred of bourgeoisie. An ideology motivated through hatred is a hateful ideology, and all that will produce is hate. Like, what is it, Yoda's, anger leads to hate?
Yeah.
And then once you have hate, that destroys everything.
So his hatred isn't just like, oh, those stupid people keeping us down, because he was actually from a wealthy family. But it's more, well, to quote him right here, in one word, for exploitation, veiled by religious and political illusions, naked, shameless, direct, brutal exploitation. So what you do see of capitalist companies where they just exploit like Nestle, the banana company, EA, Monsanto, they just destroy and rape the earth, and they just ruin their own workers' well-being for their own gain. Yeah. And so that's what he's saying of the bourgeoisie, and he says that it's not even their fault exactly. It's a natural. It's not even natural. It is a logical consequence of the fact that they are what they are. He gets into that somewhere in here. But we don't even need to read it to dismiss it out of hand, because you can be a philanthropist, and that already...
Yeah, you can be a philanthropist. Even on that noting, you can hate someone for doing something evil, and you can destroy everything they ever had. Such is the case with, communism in practice, when the slightly richer Russian farmers were killed by the poorer farmers. And it turns out the slightly richer Russian farmers knew what they were doing. But what's worse is when they destroyed these farmers' lives that killed them, and they also burnt down their barns and destroyed their tools, because it was all things that they shouldn't have. And some things were stolen and other things were destroyed. Whereas, in the most evil sense, instead of going, oh, these horrible farmers who are so much better than us, they're rich because they're stealing from their neighbors and doing all this stuff, so we have to kill them. But instead of that, you could go, well, that's labor we could put to use, and so you can enslave them instead to make them work for you, which even already is a better use for them than killing them if you're taking the stance of the communism.
Except then there's still... Why wouldn't that work? The end section where he talks about the different kinds of communism that don't work, it's actually quite enlightening.
But also, even on top of that, outside of communism, I'm just talking about being evil. Without being evil, though, we're if they're correct in the assumptions that these farmers were richer because they stole from everyone else and they did these things, you could basically say, well, they still produce a good amount of food, though. Right? We can see that they do that.
But everyone could produce that food themselves. So there's a very famous line. I don't know if
Well, I'm just trying to think like the thought with even Monsanto, instead of like we have to completely obliterate Monsanto, you could just co-opt the machines that they have into.
Well, that's season means of production. That is communism.
I guess
That's what they're trying to do. So there's a very famous line. I don't know if you've heard it, which is that, and this is to do with communism. The difference between what you earn and what you make is called profit. And so, or another way to phrase it is the difference between the value you generate and what your employer pays you is called profit.
Yeah.
So what communism wants is to be given 100% of the value they create. Which instantly stifles all innovation, which Marx wanted. He actually came from the other direction in some ways. He wanted to stop innovation, and the way to stop that was, which we've talked about before.
Yeah. And why were they so obsessed with the space race? I guess they weren't true communists.
Well, no, once Stalin was in charge, he was just... We'll get into it because it's very interesting. In the Communist Manifesto, you can already see what Stalin did was...
The shadow of Stalin?
No, it's like blatant. It's like it was inevitable, basically. Like it's not even like, oh no, real communism hasn't been tried. It's no, Stalin was kind of doing it right. And
okay.
He was a bit more bloodthirsty than they suggested, but he was right in line with you need a true communist at the head of everything. So yeah, here the bourgeoisie, wherever it has got the upper hand, has put an end to all feudal, patriarchal, and idyllic relations. It has pitilessly torn asunder the motley feudal ties that bound man to his natural superiors, and has left remaining no other nexus between man and man than naked self-interest, than callous cash payment. It has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalrous enthusiasm, of Philistine sentimentalism in the icy water of egotistical calculation. It has resolved personal worth into exchange value, and in place of the numberless and feasible charted freedoms, has set up that single, unconscionable freedom, free trade.
Sounds like he almost wants monarchy back, or system.
No, he didn't like those either, but he's saying this is their brand of tyranny.
Okay.
Yeah. And so he's gotten rid of all those other tyrannies that control the people, and instead they've brought in free trade, which is...
has no romanticism whatsoever.
Yeah, it's completely materialistic. And Marx was a materialist, and he said the only way to look at the world was through material relations.
Yeah.
The bourgeoisie has stripped of its halo every occupation hitherto honored and looked up with reverent awe. It has converted the physician, lawyer, priest, poet, man of science into paid wage laborers. The bourgeoisie has torn away from the family its sentimental veil and has reduced the family relation to a mere money relation. That is a very interesting line.
Yeah.
Because
I sort of can agree with him saying that they took away the prestige of the lawyer, the doctor, all that stuff. To extent, however, even then we actually still quite revere them.
So it's interesting. Under communist Russia, authors like, Tolstoy were before that, but so those don't count. But the great Russian authors during the Soviet Union were paid by the state. They weren't paid. They were provided for by the state. So they didn't actually have to...
Sponsored.
Yeah. They didn't have to write books for mass appeal. They didn't. Yeah. So the Russians were quite horrified by the Americans when they would have conferences, because American writers would degrade themselves to the level of the populace to try to get the people to buy their books, otherwise they'd go out of business. Whereas the Russians were free to write whatever they wanted and write the greatest possible works possible. And so you say, yeah, this is great. And it's the same with the lawyers and the doctors and the physicians. Yeah. Like, you don't have a company like Pfizer that's trying to manipulate the world to buy their vaccine when instead they could just create the best possible solution to a problem because they get paid no matter what.
Yeah.
And it is great that way. But what's interesting on the opposite end was, this was Dave Barry that talked about this, when he was talking to the Russians. He was like, yeah, it'd be great if I didn't have to just pander to whatever, like if my editor didn't say, hey, change that because people won't understand what you mean. But on the other hand, I can write whatever I want. I can insult George Bush, or Clinton, I think it was at the time. I can insult Clinton. You can't.
Yes.
You can't insult the head of Russia.
No.
And this has been...
Your boss is just a different boss. Instead of being the masses who pay you with money,
it's whoever is your
keeper.
And now if you had a wise king who, in theory, said, do whatever you want, then that would be ideal.
Yeah.
But
even a wise king could see someone writing a book saying, sacrifice 5 children a day, you must do it. And then the king's like, not to nag, but that book you just wrote, I don't really like it.
And a wise king, that was Plato, right? Who said the philosopher king would be the ideal ruler?
Yeah.
It'd be the man who didn't want to rule, that you would force him to be a ruler. It's kind of interesting because Plato was probably the greatest philosopher of his time. And he's writing books about, like, you should force a great philosopher to be king. Oh, would he hate that?
Nudge, nudge, wink, wink.
Oh, would the philosopher hate that? Oh, no. I sure hope you got... I'm a philosopher. I wouldn't... But if...
I think he was probably referring to Socrates, though.
When Socrates was dead.
Yeah, but I think he wanted Socrates to rule.
Or someone like him.
Yeah.
Can you imagine? But no, but I didn't want to. But unless...
I don't know, can you imagine Socrates as like an absolute monarch?
I don't know if he'd actually be that good because he'd be very indecisive.
That's what I mean. Like, imagine trying to he's in charge of Athens. Then they're trying to negotiate with the Spartans, and the two Spartan kings just go berserk because he's so annoying.
What you could do though with the Philosopher King, which maybe is what Plato said. I haven't actually read Plato. I have his book, but I haven't read his massive book, The Republic.
Yeah, it's kind of hard to read.
It's also Plato. I thought's a very good writer.
He's a good writer, but it's still hard to read.
But it's massive, so I haven't gotten around to it yet. But
I think you actually have to be quite like. No, some people are like, oh, this is a hard read. You have to be smart to read it. I actually think that's what the case with Plato, because when we were reading it in philosophy class, like the small bits from his Republic, one of the things is like translation can only be done so well, so that impacts it. But also just some of the ideas like what.
There's just a depth to it that's hard to...
Yeah.
I would actually argue the Communist Manifesto, you'd have to be quite smart to read properly as well. Not to toot my own horn. I didn't understand a lot of it, to be fair. But not because of its depth, because it's really, really poorly written. It's got sentences that are like 2 paragraphs long.
Yeah. No, Plato's Republic is really well written. That was one thing that I noticed the difference between it with Kant and Plato's Republic. When we were going through the two, it's like, holy, you could just read Plato's Republic. It was hard to understand, but you could read it. It was well written.
You know, Marx is a worse writer than Jordan Peterson. That's saying something. Well, Jordan Peterson got a lot better with his last 2 books. And his 3rd book, I guess now. 4th book that's out. But like Maps of Meaning was very poorly written. Communist Manifesto is even worse. So it actually took me quite a long time to read, because I told you about this, where I'd spend like 3 hours on a single sentence. Literally 3 hours. I'd put it down and just sit on my bed and think, because I was so confused. I was like, what's going on? And then normally the answer is, oh, wait, this is... So you know how he's saying all these things? Like, it has drowned the most heavenly ecstasies of religious fervor, of chivalry. So those sentences, in certain areas, it's very confusing. And you're like, wait, so communism bad? Oh, wait, no, he doesn't like those things.
Oh.
And then...
Oh, is that... He doesn't like fervor and chivalry?
In that sentence, I'm not sure. But there's other sections like that.
Yeah, because it's like, chivalry is a good thing, and religious fervor can be actually quite nice in certain cases.
So he has pointed out that the monetary exchange does force a certain degree of catering.
Yeah.
However, he then demands an alternative that is terrible. Instead of saying, here's a problem, I don't know what to do about it. Or here's a problem, what if we tried this? It's like, here's a problem, we need a violent revolution.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So capitalism forces you to have ever-expanding markets, and this means that they're constantly exploiting and getting bigger and bigger. Industry drives industry.
Yeah.
I
think that is one of the big flaws of capitalism is it's this system of continual constant growth.
Yeah.
And, well, constant growth is nice. I also, like, when I'm playing Europa Universalis, there's sometimes when I'm playing as, like, England or Scotland or whatever, and I have my kingdom in a really nice spot, and I sort of just sit there and let it stew. It's like, yep, I've got my gold reserve. I don't actually need to expand. I'll just expand my gold reserve, I guess, but I'm not going to spend money to make mine. I'm just going to let everything run, and I bet people would actually quite like that. Like, it says a normal citizen's like, yeah, just...
But once you start playing games with money and the stock market, then you need to constantly be growing more and more and more. And I mean, I can read what he says. It's just so long. I don't know why he takes so long to say it. Let's see. It's not bad. Like, his ideas are pretty solid in some ways. Like the initial observations, except for like history is the conflict of 2 classes. Constant revolutionizing. Well, let's even go back further. The bourgeoisie cannot exist without constantly revolutionizing the instruments of production, and thereby the relations of production, and with them the whole relations of society. Conservation of the old modes of production in unaltered form was, on the contrary, the first condition of existence for all earlier industrial classes. Constant revolutionizing of production, uninterrupted disturbance of all social conditions, everlasting uncertainty and agitation distinguishing the bourgeoisie epoch from all earlier ones. All fixed, fast-frozen relations, with their train of ancient and venerable prejudices and opinions, are swept away. All new-formed ones become
Antiquated?
Yeah, before they can ossify. All that is solid melts into air, all that is holy is profaned, and man is at last compelled to face with sober senses his real conditions of life, and his relation with his kind. The need of a constantly expanding market for its products chases the bourgeoisie over the whole surface of the globe. It nestles everywhere, settles everywhere, establishes connections everywhere. The bourgeoisie has, through its exploitation of the world market, given a cosmopolitan character to production and consumption in every country.
Not wrong so far in the observation.
Well, but what's annoying, I find this really annoying about the whole Communist Manifesto. He asserts that. He doesn't give an example anywhere.
Yeah.
Like, could he at least say, like, he does talk about how the Americans are the masters of this, but he doesn't talk about anywhere like, okay, so here's a factory, and everyone was happy and it was stable. But then the bourgeoisie took over, and now they are asking for more. Like, he doesn't give a concrete example. He just asserts something. Now, I think a lot of people will agree with what he's asserting there.
Yeah.
But that's not the basis for a logical argument.
Yeah. Well, also, the assertion so far isn't bad. It's just an observation. So
He's not saying observation. He's saying this is how it is.
Yeah.
And I don't actually want to, review the whole Communist Manifesto. I just want to pick out highlights of terrible sections, basically. This is a good point, actually. It compels all nations, on pain of extinction, to adopt the bourgeoisie mode of production. It compels them to introduce what it calls civilization into their midst, to become bourgeoisie themselves. In one word, it creates a world after its own image. And now, why would that be?
Well, you have to be able to compete with them because it's by far the most productive system.
The cheap prices of its commodities are the heavy artillery with which it batters down all Chinese walls. Yeah, you can't compete with how cheap and how plentiful everything it has is.
Yeah.
Isn't that horrible?
Yeah.
That's so weird. The bourgeoisie has subjected the country to the rule of the towns. Now that one, yeah, that's annoying. You ever looked at an election map and it's actually just city versus country?
Yeah.
Like it's not location.
The countryside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you look in the States, for example, all the cities vote Democrat. Everywhere else, like if you went by landmass, like 95% of Americans are Republican.
Yeah.
Except it's by population and everyone's in the city. And the city is where all the industry is.
That's interesting. Because in Japan, they have something like 18 parties. And there's coalitions formed in those parties. And like the ruling ones ruled for a while. But their voter bases are everywhere, like in different cities and different amounts.
I imagine it's still largely left-right with the city and not. But they do have a lack of not city.
Yeah.
It's a very industrialized country. But a lot of those multi-party systems, there is still basically two.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm saying. There's still basically two.
Although Italy, I don't know much about Italy, but I remember back in social studies, I think it was, when we learned about Italy, they had 11 parties at the time, or maybe it was 13. And they were all fairly even.
Italy forms coalitions as well, but there's certain points which they won't agree with even in the coalition.
Italy is one of the few countries on earth that could, in theory, re-elect fascists because it is so divided among, and their fascist party is quite large. People would argue that they have elected the fascists, but that remains to be seen. I mean, given that she disavowed the fascists, I would be surprised, but I guess it's not impossible.
Are actually democracies doomed to fall into two parties?
That was Aristotle's argument, I think.
Yeah.
Which was that eventually, because the only way you're going to win is if you unite, and so you're going to. What's kind of neat about, I think, the Green Party in Canada, if it was more, it's not powerful enough most of the time, but it was in BC, is that they're economically right-wing, but they're policy-wise left-wing.
Yeah.
So they can be a kingmaker.
Well, I think that the electoral reforms are actually one of the things that help stop that, because you go, I can only vote for the side that will win. Whereas if you have that whole option of, well, I want to vote for this guy. However, if he doesn't win, then I can choose a second option. And that lets you vote for the little guy, and you can, but if you don't get your little guy, and then you can go, well, I can't have that person, so I'll put this person. Instead of being, I can't have that person, and that's how you vote.
I've been thinking, I wonder what the downside to that is. Because I'm sure there is one.
It's a little more complicated.
That I don't think is much of a downside.
That's one of the claims of why we shouldn't do it, is it'll confuse people.
I looked at an American ballot recently. I didn't know this. Their midterms happened recently.
Yeah.
And I don't understand how their midterms work. I was like, is that like a Canadian election? Because they vote for their president.
Yeah.
And then during midterms, they vote for all their officials.
Yeah.
So I was like, what does that mean? So I looked at one of their ballots. They have like 10 sections on the ballot.
Yeah.
It's quite in-depth. It's like, which senator do you want? Which governor do you want? Which representative do you want? Which, like, they have to vote for a whole bunch of people.
Yeah.
And I mean, if Americans can handle it,
Yeah.
I'm sure other nations can handle the ordered ballot.
Well, I don't know if the it is flawed, the switching, like the electoral reform of first past the post.
I think it could cause you to have a much more divided country in terms of your House of Representatives, like the House of Commons,
Yeah.
could have like 6 parties outgoing at once.
And that would cause stagnation, and that's I prefer for governments farther.
Yeah.
Because the less they can do is honestly the better.
It would heavily restrict the government's ability to act.
Yeah.
Which, I mean, that doesn't sound... Why I'm saying that is Marx saw a problem, and he saw an obvious answer that was like, how is anyone not implementing this really obvious solution?
Have one party?
Well, or implement communism.
Yeah.
And I think the same might be able to be said of, well, it's so obvious, just put in the ordered vote or whatever.
Yeah.
And I think that just because we can't see off the top of our head an unforeseen consequence, there could be quite the downside.
I mean,
it'd be interesting to see the literature on
so
it.
obvious, honestly, is just bring back the monarchy.
Well, a good ruler is the best form of government.
Yeah.
And the question is, do you want those moments of glory with the risk of terror and destruction and horror? Or do you want democracy, which is very stable in terms of the good and the bad? You can't really have good goods, but you can't really have that bad bads most of the time. And I've always, like, whenever I play games, and often when I make decisions, well, not so much. I like to think I do, but I'm not sure if that's true. But I like high highs and low lows, like as a risk option.
Yes.
And like I would rather in D&D I've developed this little system, which is you can roll a d20 or 3d6, and I'd rather roll a d20.
Yeah.
I think it's more interesting, even if you get a bunch of bad rolls. And so in some sense you'd be like, well, that'd be great to take that risk for the great king. But I also think the great kings are quite a bit rarer than the bad kings.
Yeah.
And it's not a game. But the question, should you treat your life differently than how you treat your art? Like, you like the books that have the risk of the main character. Like, Game of Thrones is massively popular because anyone could die, but that makes the glories all the more glorious. And so should you treat your life differently from how you'd treat your art? And say, well, I don't want a chance at glory. I'd just rather have my life be stable with no highs or lows.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, bipolar is defined by great highs and lows, and it's considered horribly destructive. And a lot of times, the people that want the most stability are those who have the best lives because they don't want it to change.
Yeah.
So what a democracy can allow you to do is you are the one who decides if your life is great or not. In an authoritarian government, it's your leadership who determines if your life is good or not.
Yeah.
Which is actually a really interesting thought, because that means if your life is going poorly and you don't want to take responsibility for it, then you're going to, of course, call for a communism for the government to take your hand, or for a king to take your hand.
Yeah.
That's a really interesting thought.
So you can blame someone and then have someone fix it.
Instead of you being the one that has to fix it. So under democracy, you're responsible for yourself. So
Yeah.
that... Who was it that said that? Because I wasn't sure if I believed it, but they said something like free speech is a necessary precondition for democracy, or democracy necessarily needs free speech, something like that. And I think that would be true, because if democracy seems to be all about self-determination under that idea. It's not about having a government that uses the wisdom of crowds. It's about having a government that is so stagnant that you have to self-determine your own destiny, which would explain why American culture is all about self-determination.
Yeah.
It's actually, I've been watching Sadhguru, the Indian mystic, and
farmer.
He's a farmer?
Wait, he's a farming. He talks a lot about farming.
Does he?
Yeah.
Oh, I haven't noticed. But the comments on the videos are very interesting because he speaks to a mostly Indian audience.
Yeah.
And Indian families are kind of awful from a Western perspective. And a lot of Indians hate them as well. So an Indian guy, he summed it up quite well, which was Indian parents live their lives for their children because their parents live their lives for them.
Mm.
So it's like you only get to live your own life and freedom through your children.
Mm.
And they've got these very controlling parents that say you have to do this, you have to do this. And one guy talked about this thing where you can say like, no, Mom, I don't want to do that. Like, you know, I don't want to do Indian Thanksgiving with you. I don't know what the equivalent.
I don't want to marry whoever.
Yeah. Or just even like, I don't want to.
I actually know very little about Indian culture, so.
I don't want to work at your hairdresser store. I want to go off and do my own thing. Or I don't want to go to Thanksgiving with you. Something like that. One of these things that they do have an equivalent in American culture. But in American culture, you can say, no, I'm not going to Thanksgiving. I'm spending it with my friends, or I'm going with my family, or no, I've got this thing I'm working on. And people will be like, oh, okay, like maybe they'll be a little upset, but they'll typically say, you know, if they like you, they'll typically say, oh, good for you. You do the thing you want to do.
Yeah.
I'm inviting you to Thanksgiving, not for me, but for the mutual benefit of us both.
Yeah.
And if you don't think that'll mutually benefit us, then you do you. And
yeah.
So it's actually quite beautiful. And by American, I actually mean American, like Mexico, Canada, United States, even like South America to some extent. Although South America less so. But yeah, the whole, like North American culture especially.
Yeah.
And it's all English, I guess, at the end of the day. But less so. Americans really kind of perfected it. So there's... in India, you can say, like, okay, Mom, I'm not going to Indian Thanksgiving. And the guy talked about how she'll say, oh, you think you're better than me? I spent 9 years carrying you my womb, and now you are my elder.
9 years?
Sorry, 9 months. I spent 9 months carrying you in my womb, and now you are my elder, and you will tell me what is to do and what is wise. And then they'll like break down and cry. And like, it's very manipulative, very controlling. And you can say, oh, it's a different culture, but I think I prefer the American one. And it sounds like a lot of Indians too. That's actually a problem Japan has had, where they have a culture very much of subservience to your elders and to your business.
They're collectivists.
Yeah, but then you see Americans and they want it, but they don't. The thing about Americans is there's a lot of responsibility in freedom.
Yeah.
Because you can say, no, I'm not going to Thanksgiving, I'm busy doing heroin. Because that's freedom, right? But what you have to do with freedom is actually do the thing. You need to do what you want, but you have to actually understand what you want.
Yeah.
You can't just be a hedonist. You actually have to understand what you want. It's not just, well, heroin makes me feel good, therefore that's what I want to do. It's, no, what is most fulfilling to you? What is your destiny almost?
Yeah.
And Japanese don't have that aspect, because what you want is what everyone wants, is the community, and then you have this weird disconnect and it falls apart, because the Japanese system works quite well within its own community. And I think the more I think about collectivism compared to individualism, they're kind of the same thing from two different points. It's like collectivism is serve everyone so that each person is strong. Yeah. But as I talked about in that TV show I watched, when the kid was doing all the work for her class, the teacher chewed out the other kids, like, you need to take on responsibility, so she's not taking on all the responsibility for so even though there's this idea of serve others, other people have to be serving you too.
Yeah.
And then the American one is you make yourself as strong as possible and the whole community will flourish. Yeah. So you still haven't abandoned your community. It's just the way to make your community best is to do the best thing you can. It's a weird little section. The less the skill and exertion of strength implied in manual labor, in other words, the more modern industry becomes developed, the more it is the labor of men superseded by that of women. Differences of age and sex have no longer any distinctive social validity for the working class. All are instruments of labor, more or less expensive to use according to their age and sex. I guess what he's saying is the bourgeoisie has actually united the working class into a homogeneous entity. Like age, sex no longer matters. They are just the working class.
Yeah.
And so you've created a very strong group against yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't think that's a section where he's complaining that women are now in the workforce.
Well, under communism, there actually aren't men and women. They're just comrades.
And here's something interesting. And this is something I noticed a lot about the Communist Manifesto with 200 years of hindsight. The modern laborer, instead of rising with the progress of industry, sinks deeper and deeper below the conditions of existence of his own class. He becomes a pauper, and pauperism develops more rapidly than population and wealth. So Marx saw industrialization take off, and then he saw wealth started getting sucked into the middle class.
Yeah.
And the working class needed to work to survive, and therefore the owners of these factories needed only to pay them enough so that they didn't die and could come to work the next day.
Yeah.
And that as the population grew, the wealth still was all in the company. So you just, every time a person was born, that was another pauper that was born. There was no other, and the man working in the factory just got richer because that's another person that can work for him that he can pay only the minimum needed to survive. So Marx saw this unending group of kings essentially sucking all the wealth from the people constantly. Yeah. But that's not what happened in the end. And so it's really interesting with 200 years of history that you see what happened was eventually the poorest of people became richer and richer and richer. The wealth divide continued to grow.
Yeah.
That is true. But it doesn't matter how far apart in wealth people are, as long as your poorest people...
The base level.
As long as the very poorest people in society have what they need to survive. And ideally what they want.
Yeah.
Or how about need in sense of fulfillment? Yeah. So as long as the poorest people have what fulfills them, which I don't believe we have in society today, but as long as they do have that, it doesn't matter that you have billionaires that own planets or something.
Yeah.
Or, well, yeah, sure, we can call them billionaires. It doesn't matter.
I think a planet's a little more than $1 billion to own.
By the time planets will be on a new currency and it'll be a billionaire. That's... but there's... he didn't see it as a transitionary phase that would get better.
Yeah.
He saw it as this awful... well, he did think it would get better because he thought it would be only natural that the proletariat would overthrow the bourgeoisie. And he talks about why, and that's another one of his really stupid things, if I can find it. Problem is, it's very dense, this. Like, it's... here it is. Wow. I was on the page as I was talking about it. The essential condition for the existence and for the sway of the bourgeoisie class is the formation and augmentation of capital. The condition for capital is wage labor. Wage labor rests exclusively on competition between the laborers. Because if you refuse to take the terrible job, someone else will. Okay. I was just trying to figure out why does wage labor rest exclusively on competition between laborers.
Yeah.
I was like, wait, that doesn't make sense.
However...
You can form a union.
Yeah, but also, currently, right now, where we live, that is not the case. Because people are so refusing to work through various things of realization that...
You don't even need a union, you need mass apathy.
Yeah, well, mass apathy is part of it because it's like the amount of money we have doesn't matter if it's a little bit more. More mass apathy comes from the government paying you money to do nothing because you're laid off. And so, but the mass apathy has basically no one's taking jobs, so all businesses are having to pay more and more to try to incentivize workers.
I saw a really interesting statistic in the States, which was about 3% of workers in the States. I haven't confirmed this, but it was about 3% of workers in the States are on minimum wage, which you think it would be
50%,
90%. Like, why would any company be willing to pay you more than minimum wage? And I think it's because, well, you want to attract talent to your company.
Yeah.
Oh, that's free market. Wow, that's useful. And secondly, people aren't monsters.
Yeah, well, but even if people are absolute monsters, right? So, we have two identical companies. They both build buildings. And...
So this is why it doesn't... okay, so competitive wage, right?
Yeah.
That's what causes prices to go up. It's like, I really want that Google engineer working for me, so I'm going to pay him like 10 times as much.
Exactly. That's what I'm going to... So two identical companies, both construction companies, one of them pays $30 an hour, one pays $20, and all the people who can build a building in a decent amount of time go to the $30 an hour company.
But we're all equal.
Ah, I see.
There's no competitive wage. If any one person's work is...
better than another's.
Yeah. I don't know if that was the conclusion he came to, but that would solve that paradox.
Yeah. But
in a very stupid way.
Instead, by doing that, basically the person who is hyper-competent will either run away or they will be lazy because they're not going to do any work while everyone else is...
So meritocracy actually prevents wage labor.
Yeah.
I guess the problem with the early factories was there was no skill involved.
Yeah.
We actually have there was a much more skilled time before the start of industrialization, and we're in a much more skilled time now.
Yeah.
But even in the Soviet Union, there was that coal miner that produced like 3 times as much coal as his comrades. Like, you wouldn't think there's that much skill to mining, but...
There is a huge amount.
But, well, that's the thing. Like, I'm sure if you stick someone in a loom factory, you get the guy whose machine only breaks down half as much as his...
Yeah, he treats it well. And if you have this guy, right, in the loom factory, and you treat him nicely, and he's working on these machines, and then he goes, so these 3 gears you have here, I've been working on this machine for a while, and I really understand it. If we change out one of these gears to like a swivel gear, it'll make this machine work like 10% better. It'll be easier on me.
But then why would the guy do it? Because then it's costing him to upgrade the machine. But of course he'd do it because he'd make more money.
Yeah.
Yeah. No,
And then you pay him for excellence. And then you kind of promote people for that excellence.
No, you're evil. You don't promote him for it. You just... But his work still gets easier. Got to be evil capitalists.
But being an evil capitalist, I want to give people more money because then they'll give me more money.
Yeah. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation... Oh yeah, that's actually an interesting...
In so many management games, I don't know if it's just the design of the management, but in so many that I've played, because I actually quite like resource management games, they usually have it built in. This might not reflect reality, but if you make your little wage slaves happy, you make more money.
I think RimWorld does it really well, where they work the same no matter how happy they are.
But they don't break down.
Yeah. And so it's really funny watching Mr. Samuel Streamer. He loves to try to stratify classes, so he'll make like horrible slaves and then people who are wealthy and whatnot. And you see it over and over again, where he's like, yeah, these people, they're scum, we're going to put them in tiny little rooms and they won't have any luxuries. And they keep breaking down to the point where he's like, okay, I'll give them like a hot tub and I'll give them like nice beds because I just want them to work for me.
Yeah.
And it happens every time. It's quite funny.
No, I think RimWorld is actually one of the better examples of that because, right, it's not that you get bonuses for making them happy. It's that your colony remains functioning for keeping them happy.
Now, I think the negative thing you could take from RimWorld is the worse jobs you give to your happiest colonists. Like, I need someone to bury all these corpses. Hey, you look happy.
Yeah.
Let me ruin your day.
I mean, but another thing that RimWorld comes and shows is you give the jobs to the people who can handle them. Like, your corpse barrier is the psychopath of the colony.
Yeah, but then they're not getting extra wages for doing the worst work, potentially. So even the most resilient, happy, or psychopathic people, it just means more work for you with no gain because there is no individual...
Yeah, but I quite often give the psychopath nicer housing.
And well, the other thing, there's no need to, but your psychopath is very useful. So he might get the best armor first. Yeah. Because you don't want him to die. He's the most irreplaceable person in your colony.
Yeah, so when I say best housing, he gets a bed that makes it so he doesn't need as much sleep, and he gets like things that make it so he's immortal, so they regenerate him, and he gets that before other people do. That's the good housing. It's full of technology that keeps you alive.
So the advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers due to competition by their revolutionary combination. Okay, I hate this sentence so much. The advance of industry, whose involuntary promoter is the bourgeoisie, replaces the isolation of the laborers, due to competition, by their revolutionary combination, due to association. That's one of the 1 hour sentences. That was just because of how it was written. So if I remember when I figured it out, so the bourgeoisie, they have no choice but to keep advancing the industry, and that makes the working class more and more equal because the more advanced machinery you have, the less skill and strength and everything matters. And if everyone's wage is the same, because you're all on wage labor,
Yeah.
you're not even competing for a better position in the factory. And so you're all comrades in arms in the factory, which we talked about.
Yeah.
So the bourgeoisie necessarily needs to make better technology because of competition with other bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
Or they will go out of business and there'll be a proletariat as well. But by this advancement, they actually force all these working class to associate with each other as equals. And then if they don't like their working conditions, which they won't, you have created the foundation for a revolution. And so what the bourgeoisie therefore produces above all is its own gravediggers. Its fall and the victory of the proletariat are equally inevitable. And it does make a certain amount of sense. You're like, okay, so he's going to force all these people together, and they're going to then overthrow the bourgeoisie.
Yeah.
And now there's a very simple way to stop that, actually. If you're an evil capitalist, you promote one of the workers to manager.
Yeah, and this was the thing that they did in the slave colonies. Is you had a boss boy.
And you make it a competitive position.
Yeah.
You say, you're the boss boy right now. But if that guy is doing better work than you, or you're not up to snuff, then... And so you make them fight each other.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, come on, the evil proletariat. I mean, the evil bourgeoisie. They're not just going to let these people be chummy. It's not inevitable. They're smart.
That's the purpose of middle management from the evil capitalists.
Wow.
And so then when you have a company that is 75% middle management and 25% workers, which most technical companies are. Well, no, it doesn't work because the
No, I hate it. I hate it so much. I'm joining the revolution.
you have 75% middle management, so it's just all backbiting and infighting, and then the people who rise up, they're only 25%. There's not enough power among the 25%.
It's so evil. I hate it. No, I think Marx was wrong because it's not inevitable. It needs to be pushed forward. We need people to rise up and force the workers into a position where they'll overthrow the middle managers. I hate it. And I think that's why communists these days, they're not Marxists. They're smarter than that. Like,
Yeah.
Because it's just so stupid. Like, that is the thing. You can laugh at the Communist Manifesto. Communists nowadays are way better.
Are they now?
At insidiousness? Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah, Sensei.
Everyone agrees with them now. You're like, you're a cruel bigot if you don't agree with them. Like, they're much smarter. And their ideas are also better. Like, they realize that they need to destroy people's lives in order to have them revolt.
Yeah.
I mean, that was Lenin. He wanted people to be miserable so that he could have the communist revolution over and over and over again.
But had perpetual revolution. He was just trying to make infinite power.
No, he didn't want perpetual revolution. Like, communism is about the end of revolution. It's about the one last revolution. Lenin, actually, the more I learned about him, I used to think, he was the visionary, and then he got overthrown by Stalin, and oh, what a shame. But no, Lenin was awful. He was a horrible, horrible man. Like, so, he first made lives miserable. Yeah. And then there was going to be a resolution, but he somehow tweaked it so that the peaceful resolution wouldn't come about, and they overthrew the Tsar, and they overthrew the burgeoning new democratic government that was forming. And he's like, yeah, now we have our socialist country. And the people said, okay, so can we have a vote? And he's like, yeah, of course. Well, we're of the people. Our new leader, I'm the temporary leader because I led the revolution. Trotsky's like a military genius. I didn't know that, but Trotsky's actually like really good at tactics, strategy. So Trotsky and me, we were just the temporary guys, but we'll have an election now and we'll see who actually is in charge. So they have the election, they get destroyed. And he's like, you're counter-revolutionary forces, your vote doesn't count.
And was this Red October or was that a little earlier?
I don't remember. But it's just like, yeah, I was just the interim leader. Now we'll have an election, see who's up. They vote against him, and he says, well, obviously, you're just reactionaries. You're counter-revolutionary forces that don't want the true socialists in, so your vote's discounted.
The opposite of what Mussolini had.
Everyone loved him.
Yeah.
They loved him right up until they hung him, I think, basically. I mean, they didn't like him then. They were quite angry. But even now there's people that are looking back like, oh, the good old days. So, well, people think that about Stalin too, I think, to some extent. Maybe not.
I think there's a few people that think that about Stalin and possibly Big H.
Like, well, Hitler, I can see why you would, like, if you hated the Jews and the Serbs and everything, and the gays and the Masons. But Stalin, no one was safe. even his closest advisors. I don't know if anyone actually...
I remember hearing like some modern writer talking about how they like Stalin, respected his work, and how he's a good leader.
Were they in Russia?
No.
Yeah. I don't think anyone that...
He was a North American writer.
I don't think any Soviet misses Stalin. Okay, so this is the seeds of communist downfall from the bad. I'm just going to get a little bit of water. Real communism's never been tried.
All right.
Stalin was a fluke. Castro was a fluke. Mao was a fluke. Ho Chi Minh was a fluke.
There's about 20 other flukes.
Kim Jong-un was a fluke. All the communists were a fluke. If you do communism right, everyone's equal. All right, chapter 2.
See, the thing is, I don't want everyone to be equal.
Well, you're a racist. So, chapter 2. Why don't you want everyone to be equal?
I want everyone to have equal opportunity.
That's what equality is.
No, it isn't.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, equity is where everyone is identical. Equality is where everyone's given the same chance. Well, everyone's considered to have the same intrinsic value.
I don't consider everyone to have the same intrinsic value.
Really? Are you sure? You might want to think about that position, because I'm not sure you're correct.
All right. Sorry. Everyone has the same intrinsic value. Not everyone has the same intrinsic potential or output.
Yeah. Yeah, but that equality is just everyone has the same value. Intrinsic value.
Okay. The problem is that equity and equality get really mixed up with each other. Because the man without arms is going to have a lot of struggles. And they aren't going to be a arm wrestling champion.
And I guess equality can be used in different ways as well, so that doesn't...
Yeah, the person without arms is not going to win arm wrestling competitions. And we should not make arm wrestling competitions equivalent so that he can win them. It is something that is outside the purview of an armless man.
So under communism, we will all be brothers in arms. None of us will have a higher position than the others. There's no hierarchy.
Sorry, I was using armless man.
Yeah. We are all equal in the sense of hierarchy. Okay. So in the sense that you don't like. We are all equal under this beautiful system, if we do it right. And it's just a fluke that it hasn't happened every time it's been tried.
But what if I work harder than someone else?
Each to his need, each according to his ability. If you work harder than others, you'll provide for those who can't work as hard and need more.
But I'm not going to work very hard because I'm not going to get anything out of that. I'm selfish.
Well, then you'll go into the gulag.
A lot of people are selfish.
They'll all go in the gulag. Look, if we want everyone to behave nicely, they're going to need an incentive structure. And because we're not allowing that to be capital, it's going to be pain and fear, okay?
I think if my only choice is pain and fear, then I'll create as much pain and fear as possible in those who are going to try and put that on me.
And that's why we put you in the gulag, so you can't hurt anyone.
Well, I'm going to do everything I can to hurt you before I'm put in the gulag.
Well, that's why we're going to have a lot of people to stop you. We're going to have a giant group of people. And of course you might think, well, I can, create a revolution. I can organize people. We're going to have secret police that will break up things before they happen. They'll be everywhere. We'll offer incentive systems for your relatives to turn you in. Huge monetary rewards. And, huge philosophical rewards. They'll be considered heroes of the people.
Yeah, but I'm vindictive and clever. I might not be smart, but I'm clever. And so I will harbor resentment and do as much as I need to do. And while I'm doing the harboring, I'll enact acts of terrorism which you've never seen to the best of my ability.
Yeah, well, outliers and whatnot. But anyways, so communism, getting to my point. Everyone is equal under communism. And every time they haven't been, it's been a fluke, okay?
Because people like me aren't in it? Or the flukes are because of people like me?
No, because people are good intrinsically, right? They don't want to be selfish and cruel and vindictive. They want to put the work in, and there will be some lazy people, but we will be able to, most people aren't lazy, right? There will be some lazy people, but all in all, we will have our utopia. And the only reason it hasn't worked is just a fluke in those places. Okay. Now, chapter 2 of the Communist Manifesto. Yeah, right. So there's no hierarchy, right?
Yeah.
And it's only been a fluke that there has been a hierarchy in everything tried so far.
Yeah.
In what relation do the communists stand to the proletarians as a whole? The communists do not form a separate party opposed to other working class parties. See, they're equal with the working class. Okay. They have no interests separate and apart from those of the proletariat as a whole. So the communists are equal with the proletariat. We're all equals. There is no, like Stalin, he wasn't a true communist because he didn't realize that we're all equals with the proletariat. They do not set up any sectarian principles of their own by which to shape and mold the proletariat movement. We're all together and we're not apart. The communists are distinguished from the other working class parties by this only. But it's only one thing. Oh, two things. In the national struggles of the proletariats of the different countries, they point out and bring to the front the common interests of the entire proletariat, independently of nationality. So they're the big picture guys. It's not just about your own suffering, it's about everyone's
Working
suffering.
class of the world rise up.
Yeah. And in the various stages of development, which the struggle of the working class against the bourgeoisie has to pass through, they always and everywhere represent the interests of the movement as a whole. So the only difference between a communist and a proletariat is communists look at the big picture.
Yeah. And proletariat hasn't realized they're communists yet.
Well, no, a lot of them are with you. The communists, therefore, are on the one hand, practically, the most advanced and resolute section of the working class parties of every... the most equal and resolute section of the working class parties of every country. That section which pushes forward all others. On the other hand, theoretically, they have over the great masses of the proletariat the advantage of They have over the great masses of the proletariat the equal understanding, the line of march, the conditions, and the ultimate general result of the proletarian movement.
Are you adding the equal in?
Yes.
So they're actually saying they have the advantage?
Yeah. Well, they're the ones that actually understand the...
So you're idiots. So listen to us.
The communists are the ones...
Superior.
Well, no, they're not idiots. It's just the communists have the advantage of clearly understanding the movement.
Yeah.
The rabble don't get it, but wait, our brothers in arms. Look, in every movement, there's the doers and there's the thinkers, right? And a doer is equal to a thinker. There's not one is higher than the other. But the thinkers have to tell the doers what to do. Equally. So they form a sort of...
4 legs good, 2 legs better. 4 legs good, 2 legs better.
So a sort of natural leadership-looking structure might appear. A sort of inverted funnel, we like to say. But the people at the top are just the most equal. Well, some might say the least equal. No,
Off to the acid mines with you.
Okay, so then they talk about their distinction between themselves and a normal revolution. But I just thought that section was very interesting, that the difference between a communist and a proletariat is the communists know what they're doing.
Yes.
And what he's saying is...
Well, see, that's why I was saying this is a charitable thing. If the proletariat doesn't realize that they're communists, they just don't know it yet.
Well,
and then when they become the communists, then they too...
Well, no, you can be a proletariat and want a communist utopia without being a communist.
Uh-huh.
A communist is someone that understands the philosophy of communism.
Yes, and so they must guide the proletariat to it.
Well, it doesn't say here you have to guide them even. It just says that communists are the ones that understand. So in theory, you could have a revolution where you didn't have anyone in charge, and the people that understood it the best were doing the same as everyone else.
So the true communist revolution has no communists in it.
Well, it has no leader.
Yeah, so it has no communists in it.
It has no direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it has no communists.
Well, the communists just hide their knowledge, or they don't use it to convince people.
No, the true one has to have no communists in it.
No, it can have communists. They just can't be the influencers or something, maybe. I don't know. So then he talks about, or they, I guess. All property relations in the past have continually been subject to historical changes consequent upon the change in historical conditions. The French Revolution, for example, abolished feudal property in favor of bourgeoisie property. The distinguishing feature of communism is not the abolition of property generally, but the abolition of bourgeoisie property. But modern bourgeoisie property, private property, is the final and most complete expression of the system of producing and appropriating products that is based on class antagonism, on the exploitation of the many by the few. In this sense, the theory of communists may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property.
So where do you sleep at night?
In the people's house.
Yeah, but which bed do you sleep on?
The people's bed.
But what if Frank's sleeping on it?
Then it's the people's bed.
So can you sleep on it as well?
Yeah?
Well, if Frank disagrees.
Well, then it's pretty gay.
But Ashley, like, what if you're really fat and Frank doesn't want to get smothered?
Well, go to a different people's bed.
Well, no, you're sleeping on that bed.
No, Frank's sleeping on it.
No, you are. It's the people's bed.
Yeah,
Not
but
Frank's bed.
But Frank's on the people's bed right now, so get the other people's bed.
Well, there is no other people's bed. It's the people's bed. It's not his. You can sleep there. Frank has no right to not be slept on. Don't you remember? There's no consent in the great communist
He does this really annoying thing throughout here, too.
utopia.
We communists have been reproached with the desire of abolishing the right of personally acquiring property as the fruit of man's own labors, which property is alleged to be the groundwork of all personal freedoms, activity, and independence. So, yeah, that's a good accusation. Okay, good, they'll address it. Hard-won, self-acquired, self-earned property. Do you mean the property of the petty artisan and of the small peasant, a form of property that preceded the bourgeoisie form? There's no need to abolish that. The development of industry has, to a great extent, already destroyed it, and is destroying it daily. Or do you mean the modern bourgeoisie private property? But does wage labor create any property for the laborer? Not a bit. It creates capital, that kind of property which exploits wage labor, and which cannot increase except upon condition of begetting a new supply of wage labor for fresh exploitation. So, it's like, your government will kill people. Hey, the current government kills people.
That is the worst argument.
But your government will kill people. Look.
I hate that argument so much.
It's like, you'll destroy private property. What private property? It's already destroyed. Oh, will you give us private property then? Or maybe he's saying, I think what he's saying, right, is people don't want private property. I think that's what he's saying, to be charitable, right? Because the communists aren't going to get rid of anything. It's already gone and everyone's happy.
Take Mark's boots.
Well, I said to Peter Joe.
Yeah, take his boots.
Well, I said, like, I wanted to go into the room when Marx was writing the Communist Manifesto, right? Just take his pen. That's the people's pen, comrade. So, actually, so he says earlier on, right? I read it, where he says...
Honestly, if anyone espouses to be a communist in front of you, you should have the right to steal their pants.
There's probably some clever communist argument against that, but it'd be interesting to hear. I'll have to look it up.
Just pants communists.
So, no, I disavow it. If you can't win on principle, you can't win at all, because then you haven't gotten to any... There is no victorious place to be, because you have not demonstrated the superiority of your beliefs.
My belief is superior, because I'm not getting pantsed.
No, but everyone will just be pantsing you. And then you're all communists. Like, by taking his pants, you'll become a communist.
Ah, I see.
Yeah. And therefore, you have no right to argue against what you believe in. So... He says earlier on how capitalism has devolved the family relation to one of just money, right?
Yeah.
Do you know a bit about Marx?
He was divorced, but he really loved his children. He spent a bunch of money on them. He borrowed money from all of his other family and all his friends, and they constantly kept getting money from them.
So there's letters between him and his dad.
Yeah.
And his dad gave money to all all his sisters and brothers.
Yeah.
Marx
took the Marx. He's Karl Marx.
Yeah. Karl Marx took by far the most money. And he spent it the most frivolously. He was terrible with money. He was an absolute wastrel.
Yeah, he spent a lot of it on his children.
So when he says that that capitalism creates between a family just this purely monetary relationship, he's speaking from experience.
Mm.
In the sense that he was a terrible son.
Yeah.
And terrible person with money. And he was...
That's the thing. He had like a bunch of wealthy friends, and they kept lending him money too, didn't they?
Yep. Yeah, Engels was one of them. A lot of the original communists were all very wealthy people.
Yeah.
And he burned through his father's money to the point where his father couldn't really afford to keep giving him on the same mass qualities. And
is that the case with a lot of his friends as well?
I'm not sure about that, but he it's weird that such a selfish person was advocating for a system that would require everyone to be completely selfless.
Well, I mean, that's the flowery version of it. It's a system that requires everyone to be hateful towards the rich. It's not about selfishness, it's about hatred.
Let's argue with the most faith we can for Marx.
Okay.
And say that communism is about being a selfless, good person.
All right.
But the fact is that people aren't selfless and good because Marx himself was the key demonstrator of that.
Yeah, but even on the people being selfless and good, then how are the bourgeoisie at the point that they're at? Because everything they've done has been selfish.
That was the natural result of industry, forcing them to compete with each other or be devoured by it.
Yes.
So they're on a tiger, and they can't let go.
On the note of middle class and proletariat and upper class, this is a misconception I've had, I guess, in like working class and that whole thing. But I thought that the most people were in the middle class, like it was the biggest of the classes.
It's the smallest.
But why I thought middle class had the most people in it is it's the middle class. So it's the average. So you have the super wealthy people and you have the super poor people. And then the average is where the most wealth is going to lie. And it's going to be in the middle class. Well, I mean, the most wealth lies in the upper class, but I'm saying like the distributed amongst people is the middle class. And so the middle class is going to be the biggest.
Yeah, no, I get that.
But apparently it's the smallest class?
I think so. Actually,
Isn't there
might not be
upper class?
anymore. Oh, well, yeah, I guess that. Yeah,
Smallest?
the upper class would be, yeah, fair enough.
It's a pyramid.
Yeah.
I thought of it as a kind of a diamond.
Yeah.
With the middle class.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah. I guess it is shrinking, though, the middle class. Yeah.
In both directions.
Yeah. Well, you send one person to the upper class, and then 10 people go to the
Lower class.
working class.
And then you sort of get this weird inverted like timer pyramid with an upside down pyramid on top of it. But the upside down pyramids look really small. Well, they're more accurately, it's a pyramid with a smaller pyramid on top of it.
Which is, what, the distribution of...
Wealth.
Why is there another pyramid?
Well, if the middle class disappears, then the pyramid gets snipped. And so there's the upper class pyramid on top of the lower class.
So there's like a trapezoid with a triangle on top of it, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, or it could be a very shallow pyramid.
Yeah, that too, I guess.
Very shallow looking. I don't think the numbers have to
I
correspond.
like a pyramid balancing on another pyramid, okay?
Right.
It looks funny in my brain.
Here's something I highlighted. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage, i.e. that quantum of the means of subsistence, which is absolutely requisite in bare existence as a laborer. So the average price of wage labor is the amount of money you need that will allow people to keep being a laborer, which doesn't actually make sense to me. You think that would be the mode, not the average?
Maybe.
Because you can't have... An average can't be taken at the minimum, because anything below the minimum doesn't exist, and anything above the minimum will raise the average above the minimum. But he says the average is equal to the minimum. So I guess the only way to resolve that is if every single, without question, wage laborer is... Oh, that's what he's actually saying. Oh, he's being clever. This is a sentence. It's just you put a million commas in it. The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage. That's a clever statement. I get it. Okay, fair enough. Never mind. Sorry, Marks.
It could be that's being translated from French?
No, I think it's in English.
The original?
I think so, or German. He studied in England, I think.
Okay.
Yeah.
But sometimes horrible translations with tons of commas are...
No. But this is actually just a clever sentence.
Okay.
The average price of wage labor is the minimum wage.
Right.
If he had put a period there, that would have been a very strong sentence.
Yeah. Well, that's why I say lots of commas. They can throw them in because the translator has no idea what they're doing.
Yeah. No, but you don't need to add 3 other sentences to that. That's a very good sentence, actually. That's actually really clever. I like that. If it was a sentence.
Yes.
And not the first third of a sentence. Okay. What, therefore, the wage laborer appropriates by means of his labor merely suffices to prolong and reproduce a bare existence.
Yeah.
So everything that the laborer can take through his actions is only what keeps him going, basically. Yeah. We by no means intend to abolish this personal appropriation of the products of labor, which is the personal. So we don't want to stop people from taking what they can to survive. An appropriation that is made for the maintenance and reproduction of human life, and that leaves no surplus wherewithal to command the labor of others. So we still don't want people to make anything more than the minimum possible amount, because the moment you have more than the minimum amount of money, you can ask others to work for you.
Yes.
Because you can be like, hey, can you fix my sink? Here's $20. Mm-hmm. They don't want that.
Seems like communists want a barter system more almost.
No,
where
because
you can't have stored money.
No, because bartering would still allow you to... They're talking about capital, not money.
I guess.
Capital is anything you can do to convince people to work for you. They say capital is social, not physical. Right. Because capital is anything you can use to make people do stuff for you. Right. So actually, in that sense, a sword is a great piece of capital. Because it's renewable.
Same with... Yeah, it's better than a gun because you have to have bullets in a gun.
Oh, I guess there's that, yeah. All that we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation. So we still want to take everything from everyone, but we want them to enjoy it. Under which the laborer lives merely to increase capital, and is allowed to live only insofar as the interest of the ruling class requires it. So
we want to get rid of the ruling class, but keep everything else the same.
Yeah, but they want you to be keeping yourself alive for your own sake, not for someone else's sake, but not to have anything.
Ah, yes, not to have anything, because alive for your own sake is very Ayn Randian. Keeping yourself alive for your own sake and not anyone else's.
Right, but they mean that like they don't want anyone, because what he's talking about is the upper class, the rulers,
Yeah.
want their people to be alive, so they have people to rule over.
Yeah, so unlike communists who just want everyone dead.
No, communists want you to be alive for your own sake. They want
Yes.
each person to live because that allows them to live their life. But they don't want them to have anything more, because then they would have an interest in keeping other people alive beneath them.
Yeah. So you know the anti-work movement?
Yeah.
How it is this apathy. It's basically skipping the revolution part of the communist revolution and going straight into the apathy.
If you believe that people will be apathetic.
A lot of the time, communist resolutions lead to apathy.
There's a lot of work done under communist countries as well.
I mean, the Russian military was a mess.
It was a mess before communists took over.
I mean,
Stalin-
maybe it's just the nature of Russia.
Stalin's great leap forward brought Russia about 50 years forward in terms of technological development in 5 years.
I guess.
There was great things happen, some great art, some great music, some...
But I think it does eventually turn to apathy in these places if it continues on being a system where no one can advance.
Becomes apathy if people are discontent, I think.
Okay.
But if
I guess there is... Well, actually, no, there is a huge amount of apathy in China right now.
you're given enough food and you enjoy your work, I don't think you'll become apathetic. Even if... Well, it depends. It depends on what kind of person you are.
Yeah.
When everything's taken from you, but you are given enough food and you enjoy the work you're doing, that might be enough. Like, you look at commission artists, they don't get to keep their art.
No.
And if they were given enough food to survive while doing the thing they like, maybe that would be enough for them.
Yeah.
Maybe that they...
Actually, most commission artists do get to keep their art.
No, they're selling art.
Yeah, but they because it's a lot of commission art is digital, they keep it digital.
Okay, then imagine like a busker artist on the streets.
Okay.
Drawing caricatures or something.
Yeah.
They're giving away everything. Now, what they're producing, of course, is money. But if instead they were given the food required for them throughout the day... Like, you look at the great communist writers and musicians, like Tchaikovsky, I think, who's possibly my favorite musician.
Yeah.
They were doing what they loved, creating great works.
Tchaikovsky was incredibly depressed.
Well, they kept creating the great works, though. They weren't apathetic.
No.
So I don't think I think this is something that... Who was it that was getting this weird... Well, what I argue was getting this wrong. I don't think that everyone is lazy and would do nothing unless there was an incentive to do it. I think some people enjoy creation for the sake of creation.
I completely agree with that.
And secondly, to your point of they are skipping the communist revolution, you can't skip the communist revolution, which they talk about in this book.
Of course.
It is not communism without a revolution.
I see.
Now, if you feel like if you're not appreciated, I do think that drives a lot of apathy. And I do think you're right that communism would cause a lot of apathy, but I don't think that is necessary, because you can believe in communism.
I'd rather, if I had to believe in one of the systems, I would rather have fascism. Because I could believe in a state instead of believing in the nebulousness of people.
No, communism is nationalistic as well. You believe in the state.
Do you?
Yeah, you believe in the state of the...
Because communism is kind of vague. Like, true communism, there isn't... I mean, according to this, there is the communist and then there's proletariat. But in my opinion of what communists should be, there shouldn't even be communist and proletariat. Everyone should be communist. Or everyone should be proletariat. Whereas in fascism, you have the fascismo, the true dictator leader, and the government, and that's who you direct all your focus towards. So you actually have a direction.
Right, but you can believe in the idea of communism. You can believe in the great liberating process of communism and of this utopia you are creating together.
I guess.
It's like a religion. You can believe in God. There is no God for you to vote for, but you can. That's a good idea. But there's...
Isn't that basically what the Pope is?
You know, it's not much, but it's honest work. Right.
I see.
Right? So I think if you believe in communism, then you can be satisfied in what you're doing, because... And there is people, they were brought to the... it's famously, right, they were brought into the gulags and they were still diehards of the party.
Yeah.
Because they believed in the system so much. So as long as the people like their system, I think it can keep going, potentially. So in bourgeoisie society, living labor is but a means to increase accumulated labor. In communist society, accumulated labor is a means to widen, to enrich, to promote the existence of the laborer. Why?
But the ideal of the bourgeoisie.
Well, first, what's this sentence mean?
In capitalism, or the bourgeoisie system, the labor is there to produce money, to give more money to the bourgeoisie. That's its purpose. It's money for money's sake, to enrich them.
You pay people. So living labor is a means to increase accumulated labor. You pay people. That's just your means to get even more money for yourself.
Yes.
You're only paying them so that they don't die.
Yes.
Whereas in communism, you're using all the riches generated to widen, enrich, and promote the existence of the laborer.
Yeah.
So that sounds quite nice, right? So in capitalism, money is just a way to keep your slaves alive.
Yeah.
In communism, money is a way to enrich people.
Yeah, so
my question is, what does that sentence mean still? Because,
well,
where did that come from? What's the proof of this sentence?
there isn't really any, but it's the boogeyman of the fat cat who makes money for money's sake and keeps making money. And
No, why is he saying? Like, why are they? There is no.
he's saying that to say that the bourgeoisie is awful and communists will give the money to the worker.
Yeah, but there is no logical. There's no axioms here that actually say that this is true. All we want to do away with is the miserable character of this appropriation under which labor lives merely to increase capital.
Yeah, we want to get rid of the labor just making money for their overlord. We want them to make the money for themselves.
Right. And so everything you make will enrich your own life.
Yes.
Oh, okay, that sounds nice. Sure.
Yeah.
Okay, I get what he's saying now. Okay. And you were saying something though?
So a capitalist, even...
Oh, yeah, so the more you make, the better your own life is.
Yeah.
That's why people work.
Yes.
So under capitalism, right, everyone's going to be apathetic because no matter what they do, it's all taken from them. So they'll only do the minimum possible.
A person has a vision, right?
Yeah.
They want to make cheese.
Yeah.
They want to make the best cheese possible. Now, they're not a very good cheesemaker, but they have the vision to make cheese. And so they scour the world for the best cheesemakers. And they hire all of them to work with them to make this cheese. And these cheesemakers share in that vision with this one person who brought them all together to make this. But they need to make money, so they sell the cheese they make. And so, that is a bourgeoisie system. There's a guy on top with the cheesemakers, and it's his vision to make cheese. He isn't there for money. Mm-hmm. He is there for cheese. But the more money he makes, he can pay to get more cheesemakers and make more cheese.
Right, but he has this issue where if he isn't constantly innovating and reinventing his business, he will eventually be defeated by the other capitalists. And therefore he has to abandon his principles of enjoying cheese.
Does he?
Yes, because of competition. Someone will make a cheaper cheese factory, and then he must cut costs somehow. Whereas under communism, everything that an individual makes is for what they want for themselves, and it enriches and widens their own life. All your profit goes to yourself, whereas in bourgeoisie society, the past dominates the present. In communism, the present dominates the past. Because whoever in bourgeoisie cap system, it's bad. In communist system, it's good.
Yeah.
It's not very convincing. I mean, you're saying bourgeoisie bad, communist good, but you're not really giving... like you're saying that you are using accumulated goods to rule over the present, whereas in communism, you use everything you have to improve the situation of the past or the people or anything. Yeah. So that's what he's saying, but prove it.
Proof? I do not need proof.
Here's a great sentence. In bourgeoisie society, capital is independent and has individuality, while the living person is dependent and has no individuality. And the abolishment of the state of things is called by the bourgeoisie abolition of individuality and freedom. And rightly so. That's just one of those clever things. Wait, he keeps going. The abolition of bourgeoisie individuality, bourgeoisie independence, and bourgeoisie freedom is undoubtedly aimed at...
So communism admits to the wanting the destruction of freedom?
No, the bourgeoisie freedom.
Ah.
Right, so in bourgeoisie society, capital has individuality, while the person has no individuality. Goods are unique and precious. People are replaceable and a means to get these goods. By freedom, bourgeoisie mean free trade, free selling and buying. But if selling and buying disappear, free selling and buying disappear also. And this talk about free selling and buying and all the other brave words of bourgeoisie about freedom in general have a meaning, if any, only in contrast with the restricted selling and buying with the fettered traders of medieval ages, but have no meaning when opposed to the communistic abolition of buying and selling, of the bourgeoisie condition of production, and the bourgeoisie itself.
I love my bread lines.
Well, that's with, what do you call it?
Flawed communism?
No, hindsight. Those didn't exist when this was written.
And can't you use a little bit of foresight to see that would be coming?
You are horrified at our intending to do away with private property. But in your existing society, private property is already done away with for 9/10 of the population. Its existence for the few is solely due to its non-existence in the hands of those 9/10. You reproach us, therefore, with intending to do away with a form of property, the necessary condition for whose existence is the non-existence of any property for the immense majority of society. I beg your pardon? You are reproaching us for doing away with property that causes you not to have property.
Yeah.
Right. In one word, you reproach us with intending to do away with your property. What?
You reproach us for taking away your property, but you don't have property, peasant.
And so we're going to take away your property. What?
Yes.
From the moment when labor can no longer be converted into capital, money or rent, into a social power capable of being monopolized, from the moment when individual property can no longer be transformed into bourgeoisie property, into capital, from that moment, you say individuality vanishes. You must therefore confess that by individual you mean no other person than the bourgeoisie, than the middle-class owner of property. This person must indeed be swept out of the way and made impossible. Yeah, here you go about your questions about private property, I guess. Communism deprives no man of the power to appropriate the products of society. All that it does is to deprive him of the power to subjugate the labor of others by means of such appropriation. So communism still allows you to take whatever you want from society. It just doesn't allow you to use that to control people.
So I can hoard stuff as long as I'm not controlling anyone with it?
No, because people can take that. It's societies. So hoarding becomes impossible. And therefore you can't control people because you can't bribe anyone because they can say, well, that's mine.
Yes, I'm saying I can hoard stuff, but it won't as long as I don't control anyone with it.
You're not a hoarder at that point. You're a warehouse because anyone can still use that stuff.
What if I consume everything? What if I become a creature of avarice and just consume all?
Well, that would be each to his...
Need?
Yeah.
But Conrad, you do not need that much.
Yeah, so this is the same argument I used against you with the capitalism. It has been objected that upon the abolition of private property, all work will cease and universal laziness will overtake us. According to this, bourgeoisie society ought to have long ago gone to the dogs through sheer idleness. For those of its members who work acquire nothing, and those who acquire anything do not work.
I see.
But 2 pages ago, if you recall, the book said people are working for sustenance.
Yeah.
So that's not a counter-argument whatsoever. Because the workers do not acquire nothing, as it says on this page, but as it says on 2 other pages, they acquire the minimum wage.
Yes, the necessities to survive. Although it might as well be nothing.
No, it does. No, that's exactly wrong, because it is the minimum wage. Minimum, absolutely, what you need to survive. It's completely different from nothing. So this book is contradicting itself right there. This whole of this objection is but another expression of the tautology, that there can be no longer any wage labor when there is no longer any capital. No. See, it's all sophistry. They're saying that their opposition is sophists, but they aren't even addressing the own arguments they brought up previously.
You should have written an essay. This is hurting my brain. I do not understand much of what you're reading. I am mere proletariat. I am not communist.
Okay, so, well, that last sentence I just read, you don't have to understand it. I was just pointing out that they're saying any objections to them are tautology. A tautology is something that is because it is. So you can say, I'm the head of the tautology club. Why? Because I'm the head of the tautology club.
Okay.
Yeah. So he's saying that there can no longer be any wage labor when there's no longer any capital, because the answer to that would be, well, yeah, duh, because capital is created by wage labor.
Yeah.
But that's a side argument that is true, and he's defeating the straw man quite well there. But the whole point is that people aren't working for nothing. They are working for sustenance.
Right.
And the people at top, if they're not working and gaining stuff, I mean, that doesn't really matter. It's like, okay,
Yeah.
then they can be lazy. All right, I'll just do a few more then. Won't bore you too much with it.
I just don't get a lot of it. It doesn't make sense to me, a lot of this book. I just don't understand it.
Well, I'm also, if you read the whole thing in order, it might be easier as well.
Yeah. And that's why I said maybe a essay would be better, because it's scattered.
Yeah.
And I do not see your thoughts as you do as you've read the whole book.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
See, this is what communism drives people to. Ergo, it's bad.
Abolition of the family, even the most radical flare-up of this infamous proposal of the communists. On what foundation is the present family, the bourgeoisie family, based? On capital, on private gain. In its completely developed form, this family exists only among the bourgeoisie. Okay, so what he means by that is you have complete control over your children, because if they don't listen to you, you can withhold goods from them and they will starve.
Is that just daddy issues?
I'm wondering, that's actually making me think that maybe he just felt resentful to his dad because his dad supplied him with everything.
Because
That's actually really interesting, because if you're given everything, then you feel like you need to appease the person giving you everything.
yeah.
Whereas if you are able to seek freedom on your own, and like Marx, he didn't realize this, but he could have gone and gotten some job that would allow him to get under the shadow of his father.
Yeah.
But he felt unable to disagree with his father because of his father's supplementing his life. The funny thing is that his father really didn't like what he was doing and continued to give him money anyways.
Yeah.
So his father was actually...
As much to blame as him.
well, no, I would argue that his father was... offered him unconditional support, which allows you to be as free as you want. And he just didn't recognize that.
Oh.
And maybe his father shouldn't have done that, to be kind to him and said, look, you clearly don't get that I'm going to be unconditional. Therefore, I'm going to stop giving you the money so that the worst thing you can imagine will have already happened. And you can see that you can make it through. And I'm not a tyrant. Like, so maybe his father made the wrong choice there to support him. But so yeah, due charges with wanting to stop the exploitation of children by their parents. To this crime we plead guilty. So I think that's where you see this today, where they talk about the liberation of children from their parents and whatnot.
Yeah.
The bourgeoisie claptrap about the family and education, about the hallowed correlation of parent and child, becomes all the more disgusting. The more by the action of modern industry. All family ties among the proletariat are torn asunder and their children So he's saying, oh, you think you love families and then you just make them child labor and whatnot. And yeah, that's pretty bad. This part is... Okay, so I think I'm getting this right. I don't want to be uncharitable here, but if I'm getting this right, this is pretty bad. But you communists would introduce community of women, screamed the whole bourgeoisie in chorus. So that means you just make women common for everyone. Like, anyone can have that woman whenever they want.
Yes.
The bourgeoisie seeing his wife a mere instrument of production, because bourgeoisie are all about production.
Yeah.
He hears the instruments of production are to be exploited in common, and naturally can come to no other conclusion than the lot of common to all will likewise fall to women. So he's like, you're only thinking that because you objectify women and think they're means of production as well. So he's like, oh, burn! Got you, counter-argument. He has not even suspected that the real point is to do away with the status of women as mere instruments of production. So he's saying, look, the point of communism is that women are no longer means of production. They are people, too. And so, okay, cool. The communists have no need to introduce community of women. It has existed almost from time immemorial. Why do they phrase it that way? The communists have no need to... Why did you have to say that? You had a great argument.
Yeah.
Well, it was a bad argument. But you had a great straw man slaying there. And then you said we don't have to introduce community of women. It's already there. Wait, so are you going to do it or not? That's
That's very much like a statement. You accuse us of taking your private property. Ha! Sucker, you don't have any private property anyway, so we're going to take it.
Yeah, it's the same argument he had before. Yeah.
It's very odd.
Yeah, okay, this is awful. Bourgeoisie marriage is in reality a system of wives in common, and thus, at the most, what the communists might possibly be reproached with. So he's saying, currently bourgeoisie marriage, you already have prostitution and you have people making alliances and paying for relationships and all that sort of thing. Like, oh, you should join my family, we'll be great together. And so it's already, women are already traded, right? So at most, what communists might be reproached with is that they desire to introduce, in substitution for hypocritically concealed, an openly legalized community of women.
Was he married? And did turn out very well.
Well, you said he got divorced.
I think he got divorced. The thing I do know is he's spoiled his children rotten and was very, very terrible father, because he didn't spend much time with them, but whenever he did, he like spoiled them rotten and was always like going to go on trips with them and go to like the amusement parks and travel around with them.
So he's saying that's at most what communists can be reproached with, though. He's saying at worst we're as bad as you guys are, but we're not hypocrites.
I see.
So at worst we're a non-hypocritical version of you. So he's not necessarily saying.
So he's saying
we want to socialize the women.
So he's saying yes, there'll be prostitute colonies, but there already are, so we're not bad for that.
No, he's saying that that's the worst that could happen.
And that's okay.
No, he's saying that we wouldn't be hypocrites about it at least. And I assume that we wouldn't do that anyways, would be the natural understanding from there.
I'm not giving them any benefit of a doubt with their statements.
See, this is one of those crazy sentences. National differences and antagonisms between peoples are daily more and more vanishing owing to the development of the bourgeoisie, to freedom of community, to world market, to the uniformity in mode of production, and the condition of life corresponding thereto. So people are no longer angry at each other nationally because of the bourgeoisie.
Well, that's bad.
The supremacy of the proletariat will cause it to vanish even faster. So he sees the bourgeoisie as the start of a great revolution. He doesn't necessarily say that they're...
Did Marx live to see communist Russia?
No, I don't think so. He did see the French Revolution.
Right.
That was before his ideas.
Yeah.
Right, I think I'll just skip right ahead.
I sort of feel like Marx is one of the people that once the communist revolution happens, he's one of the guys who gets offed.
He tries to put himself at his head, like, "Hey, I came up with this," and then Stalin comes along and ganks him.
Yeah, because Stalin is far more brutal than him. He's an ideological bully, whereas Stalin is a murderous bully.
Okay, so interesting checklist, and then I'll talk about the other forms of communism, and then I'll let you go. I'm sorry this wasn't better organized than that. All right, but I think we had some interesting discussion there still, and you had some good ideas from what you could get. And if people in comments that do listen to this want to argue against what I've said because I have misrepresented communism, that's fair, because this is so disorganized that I do feel like I could have been unfair to the communists in some parts. And my arguments might just seem like a laughing dismissal because I can't think of a good argument. So yeah, I'd be happy to see those, I guess. The proletariat will use its political supremacy to wrest, by degrees, all capital from the bourgeoisie, to centralize all instruments of production in the hands of the state, i.e. of the proletariat organized as the ruling class, and to increase the total of productive forces as rapidly as possible. Of course, in the beginning, this cannot be effected except by means of despotic inroads on the rights of property and on the conditions of bourgeoisie property, by means of measures, therefore, which appear economically insufficient and untenable, but which, in the course of movement, outstrip themselves. Is that even real grammar? What? Outstrip themselves, necessitate further inroads upon the old social order, and are unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the modes of production. So, what he's saying there is that in the beginning of the proletariat fighting for control, they will despotically take away property and the conditions of the bourgeoisie's property, and it'll look like they are destroying economic tenability, and it'll look like they're ruining their economy and causing their whole country to go down the drain. But he says, it will be bad at first because you're going to have all these means of production destroyed, and you're going to be like, wow, this looks stupid. Like what happened with the kulaks.
Yeah.
But in the course of the movement, outstrip themselves. What does that mean?
Outdo.
Oh, it'll be better in the...
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that could be. This is unavoidable as a means of entirely revolutionizing the modes of production. So you're saying, look, it'll be bad, but we need to do it. It's for the revolution.
You may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to take.
He's saying there'll be a little dip and then it'll be better.
Yes, you may die, but that is a sacrifice I am willing to take.
These measures will be different in different countries. Nevertheless, in the most advanced countries, the following will be pretty generally applicable. This is the interesting list. Okay, so there's going to be these things that look backwards, but they're for the greater good, right?
All right.
So here's some of the things that people will do once the revolution is starting to kick off. This is before like an actual overthrow. This is just like changing the governments and Abolition of property and land and application of rents on all land for public purposes. So government owns all houses and
Yep.
you rent from them. Heavy progressive or graduated income tax. So the richer you are, the more you pay, or whatever it might. Poor people pay less. Abolition of all right of inheritance. So inheritance tax. Or complete inheritance tax. Yeah. Confiscation of the property of all emigrants and rebels. You break the law, bam, it's our property. Centralization of credit in the hands of the state by means of a national bank. Centralizations of the means of communication and transport in the hands of the state. Public transportation. Extension of factories and instruments of production owned by the state. So state starts owning its own factories. Equal liability to all labor. Establishment of industrial armies, especially of agriculture. So that's governments, I guess, just, yeah.
So he's saying we're on the precipice of a communist revolution in the West?
Kind of sounds like it, doesn't it? Gradual abolition of the distinction between town and country by a more equable distribution of population over the country because everything becomes agricultural.
That one not so much, I don't think.
I don't like that idea. Oh. Like, I liked how he said city's bad, but I'm not sure if I like how he says, therefore, I don't want the city people out in the country. City's bad, sure, but I like all the inmates in the asylum. I think it's the better way.
Yeah.
Equal liability to all labor equal liability of all to labor. Oh, everyone has to work.
Yeah.
Okay. Right. Equal. Okay, so you can't have people that are in charge. It's like everyone's on the farms.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the logicians are just working as hard as the farmer, but even though they're just telling them.
Well, don't you know that it's a harder job to do media presenting than it is to build a building? Yeah.
So everyone has to be equally liable to work. I guess you could take turns. That would work, right? Like you're the quartermaster, you're the logician this week, and then you're the worker next. You could do that.
You're the whip cracker today.
Yeah. That would actually work. I think.
Asterix and Obelix comic where they...
Right, yeah, they take turns. Yeah. Free education for all children in public schools. Abolition of children's factory labor. Combination of education with industrial production. Wait, hang on a second there. Wait a minute. Get rid of children's labor and then make schools do that?
Yeah, you need to learn to work. It's your education.
Hang on a sec. Okay, so that was the list I thought was interesting, that we're like halfway done.
Yeah.
But we don't have the state industrializing... So we don't have the state in charge of agriculture yet, which...
No, they're trying for it, though.
Well, and the stuff they're doing in the Netherlands and Canada is a little dodgy. They're just trying to kill people, though, I think. Like, I don't think they're trying to take over the...
No, you make it so no one can do work, and then you take their farms, and then you do the farming.
Oh, because they're not working.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe.
Then you get rid of those laws because they're hindering your ability to farm.
It is interesting that he understood that there would be setbacks. Like, he kind of did see the downsides.
Yeah.
And he said... Full steam ahead.
Yeah. I think he was a smart man consumed by hatred who saw issues but didn't have good solutions.
I think it was the fear of... This is just now thinking about it. The fear of losing his father's money made him want it to be out of his father's hands.
Yeah.
He wanted to be free, and he saw himself as enslaved to his father's money. And you see a lot
Going all Freud on him, eh?
You see a lot of communists are rich, right?
Yeah.
And I think they feel enslaved by that because they have to toe the line, or they... Like, Elon Musk's kid, he disowned a couple months ago. And that must have... I don't know if he gives them money anymore or not, but that must have been quite terrifying. Like, you have all this money and wealth, and then you say to your father, I disagree with you completely, and they argue, and I'm not... So that... You feel unfree because you can't go against your father.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is, a lot of working class people can go against their father because their father doesn't do anything for them.
Yeah, they go make money and they're out from underneath his control.
Or they make minimum wage if you want to give them the worst possible situation. But at least they're
not dependent for life.
And it's interesting, Marx didn't see that as freedom because they have to do whatever their factory owner says.
Yeah.
And Marx didn't see the option of quitting and going to the other factory owner.
Yeah.
And that might have not been an option. Or maybe all he thought were equally bad because he didn't work in a factory.
Yeah.
Like, I'm sure back then there was good factory owners.
Probably.
Who, like, on Christmas gave you, like, an extra couple dollars or something.
Extra threepence.
Yeah. I'm sure there was good factory owners out there, even if only to prevent revolution.
Yeah. So, there's a risk of them forming a union. A union? All right. Well, let them have this Sunday off. It is Christmas after all. But only because Christmas is lying on a Sunday do they get it off. Man, I'd make a great Victorian evil factory owner. Or that'd make a terrible factory owner. That line from The Emperor's New Groove, where he's... what was it again your complaint about? That we have no food? But thought of that before you became peasants!
What is it you don't have enough of? Food?
You should have thought of that before you became peasants!
So, I just skipped 2 forms of socialism. So, German socialism, or true socialism, believe that you should have a socialist revolution, not for the interests of the proletariat, but for all of mankind, to benefit mankind.
So closer to the socialism that I think of when I think of communism.
A man belongs to no class, has no reality except to exist in, as they put it, the misty realm of philosophical fantasy. So all men are equal. We should have this communist state so that all men can be together.
Yeah.
The French socialist and communist literature was thus completely emasculated. And since it ceased in the hands of the Germans to express the struggle of one class with the other, they thought they'd overcome the French one-sidedness.
Context.
It's bad because the true socialism emasculates the idea of a revolution. It removes the revolution from the equation, and therefore weakens the idea, and doesn't care about the interests of the proletariat, as we said.
Right.
And so they rose up and they were saying the bourgeoisie is taking over the press and the legislation and liberty and equality, and they're ruining it all. And the reason that German socialism failed was they forgot that the whole French criticism required that the bourgeoisie existed, and therefore all the arguments of communism are based upon the fact that the bourgeoisie is created by industry and can't be. So it's an illogical argument, is their argument, essentially, which is communism. Conservative socialism is the idea that you should instead raise the people up to the point where they don't want to revolt, and try to get more and more people into the bourgeoisie, essentially.
So closer to Star Trek.
Or what we do now.
Yeah.
In a lot of... By changes in the material conditions of existence, this form of socialism, however, by no means understands abolition of the bourgeoisie relations of production, an abolition that can be effected only by a revolution. So this essentially just keeps the bourgeoisie going, but they keep it hidden. Anyways, should stop there, actually. There's more, but it's basically every other form of communism bad.
Right.
Yeah. Get rid of that last section, maybe. I don't know. Well,
I had to suffer through it. Anyone else?
Sorry about that.
Yes. Write down your thoughts next time. Or have a book with actual sticky notes in so you can get to the pages quicker.
Yeah, well, yeah. It was an experiment.
Yes.
Do you think there's anything worth keeping, or should we do a different book?
I can keep some of it, and while you're doing that, I went through the work of making this diorama that I'm going to take a picture of. And that's going to possibly be the thumbnail, so...
Do you just want to do a different podcast? We could do a short one instead. How about that?
I want use out of my diorama.
You can just put in the description. It was so boring that we started a new one, and this is what I did while I was going. Sure, let's start it again. All right? Do a short little thing.
There are some things from that are salvageable. Do I want to go through the effort of salvaging it, though? See, it won't actually be as bad as you think it will be. And that's why I was keeping as quiet as I could. However, I worry about its structural integrity, because you're reading, you're keeping the connections going through while reading, while me and listeners are going to go, eh, and me is worse because I have to wait a minute or two before I get anything. With them, that might just be a jump that's even worse. So.
Well, I was reading to sections that were related or talking about the same thing.
Yeah. I will produce it and see what it sounds like.
All right. Well, let's do a little 45. Is that okay with you if we do a little 45 thing just in case it's all terrible?
Sure.
Okay. Hello and welcome to The Fool and the Philosopher.
The Philosopher and the Fool.
There may or may not be communism in this episode. I tried
For
to
the good of the people, we'll decide if there's communism or if there is not.
I tried to talk about communism, and I realized that, well, I tried to highlight some sections, and then I realized I hadn't highlighted enough, and it was kind of unstructured, and I'm not sure how bad it is on playback, but yeah, we'll see how salvageable it is.
In the making of it was horrendous.
So,
I should have stopped it sooner.
yeah, I mean, I did give you the choice, so I'm putting all the blame on you.
You gave me the choice to stop it at the beginning before I knew, but
Yeah.
suspected what it would be like.
Yeah, so, well, now we know for the future, if you're going to read an entire book live, be prepared first.
Yes.
Yeah, okay.
Perhaps condense it down into some easily readable notes.
And now I won't have to hear you make that same joke over and over again that the Communist Manifesto is short. Because now it felt long. Right, okay. So something short and fun. You want to talk about technology. Is that short and fun?
Parts of it are.
Okay. I want to talk about military stuff, so.
It's relevant to military.
Okay.
So I'll skip the parts about art and AI because I think that'll take quite a while. But so in technological development right now, I have this thought where I want to possibly in the future get into aerospace science or aerospace engineering, do something with spaceships because spaceships are cool. However, I actually find rocket ships really boring. I don't like rocket ships all that much because they're basically explosions that launch things. And that's all that space travel is at the moment. However, technology needs to overcome a lot of steps to get out of the explosion make thing go up. And one of those things that is pretty big for once we get out of our atmosphere is, let's start getting out of the atmosphere. So get out of the atmosphere without using explosions. We basically need to be able to control gravity in a localized area.
Or use an elevator.
Yes, or an elevator. So an elevator is another thing that could work. So that could actually skip a lot of steps.
Or a gun.
Yeah, gun's an explosion. It's just one explosion instead of continue.
I guess, yeah.
But an elevator can help us get out of the brutishness of it.
What about like a train track with those hand pump things?
That's basically a elevator.
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Yeah.
No, but I was thinking like it stops, so it's a rail gun. Like a rail gun with hand pumps.
I mean, the metallic railgun is slightly...
Or like a big magnet.
Well, there's that thing that spins the spaceship around a whole bunch, then inside a vacuum, then breaches its own vacuum and launches it.
Yeah.
Liquidize all the people inside the spaceship.
Yeah, like a trebuchet or something. That's not an explosion.
It's not that still on the level of kind of brutish fling something.
That is... I think flinging stuff's about as advanced as you're going to get.
Well, the elevator.
The
elevator's counterweights.
Yeah, that's lame. I think that, like, you have to power the elevator with explosions. You don't have to power a trebuchet with explosions.
Anyways, so you need a lot of energy to get into space. So gravity control to some... And gravity control actually is a big thing to some extent because once you're in space, I don't know, it's kind of lame. Like, it's cool for the moment where you're like, ooh, we're bouncing about in zero gravity. But to do anything practical, you need gravity to be Earth's gravity for any long-form sort of travel being sustainable in a spaceship. And spinning, it's gross. Because you're just like, oh, we're in a spinning ship. We have gravity. If our spin's ever messed up, that gets the whole gravity screwed over. And centrifugal force from the spin, that's also not the greatest thing to do because you can really mess that up. So that's probably going to take a lot of energy to do. Now, once we're in space again, warp drive. I think we've talked about warp drives before. So back in the 70s or 60s, a guy came up with the mathematics to do a warp drive. And everyone rejected it. And then they checked it later on, and it worked, but the energy was astronomical. Recently, they looked at it again, the energy is still astronomical, but it's doable. Even more recently, in 2021, they looked at it again, and the energy is still ridiculous. However, instead of taking the power of Jupiter, it just takes a lot of juice. In 2022, a group of scientists were trying to explore, I believe, launching particles to a certain extent. And this wasn't in a simulation. They were actually like doing experiments trying to mess with gravity and particles. And they accidentally created something that basically they're all looking at, what on earth have we done? One of the guys had read the mathematical theorem of the guy who came up with the warp travel. And he noticed that they had made a capsulation bubble. They hadn't made a capsulation bubble in a simulation. They had made a physical, very small capsulation bubble on Earth in reality. A warp field has actually been generated on Earth. It is very small, but it is generatable. And it's not quantumly small either. It's just small.
You know what's funny about, I was talking to our mom about this. When alien life contacts Earth, and you talk to people about it, like, did you hear that aliens, like, came down to Earth? People are going to go, yeah, I think I heard about that on the news, like, a week ago. Like, I really don't think a panic is in the cards whatsoever. And why I say that is there's always precursors that are dismissed but already exist. So there's no mind-blowing discoveries ever made.
Yeah.
It's always like, yeah, well, we knew we could do this theoretically. And then it's like, yeah, people made a little bubble like 2 years ago. And like the warp drive, like I just hear warp drive and I'm like, ah, cool. I'm not like, what? Star Trek.
Well, one of the things is it's not we made a little warp drive. We didn't go, yeah, these guys actually made a warp drive and sent a spaceship up with it.
But the thing is, when they do make the spaceship 10 years from now, there will be all these little steps along the way, so it'll never have been a surprise.
But again, it's very small that was made. So again, power is needed. Astronomical amount of power is still needed.
There's only one time in history I can think of where a cool thing happened that nobody was prepared for. And that was Hiroshima. Where, like, it was awful, but it was cool in the sense
Well, they knew it was happening with the bomb testing. It just kept it very secret.
Yeah, so the world as large didn't know. Like, that would have been mind-blowing in the most horrifying way.
So
I think cool was the wrong word there.
Yeah.
I should have said mind-blowing.
So one of the attempts to get astronomical amounts of power right now is nuclear fusion.
Yeah.
However, nuclear fusion is really lame because it's just boiling water still.
You mean fission?
Fission.
Yeah.
Yeah, nuclear fission.
Nuclear reactors.
Yes.
Yes.
No, fusion reactors, not fission reactors. We don't want fission reactors.
That's all we have.
Yeah, people are trying to make fusion.
Right.
That's what I get. People are trying to make fusion reactors, which, again, are going to produce power by boiling water.
Right. If they ever get made at all.
Yeah. Well, they have been made. They produce power. It's just so pitifully low that it's not worth it. And they can't run for very long. So the current thoughts on them is we need to build them bigger because they're not big enough. And we need to build them differently and like we need to do these things. So the attempts are always being big builder. Some thoughts is to make them smaller. And it's always about 25 years away. However, now it's only about 10 years away instead of being 25.
I watched a video of the summary of the history of fusion.
Yeah.
And every time they get close, they realize that there's like a mathematical barrier.
Yes. Yeah, there's huge amounts of problems. Another problem is actually the resources required to run nuclear fusion. Turns out that there's like two elements we need. One of them is super abundant. The other one there's basically non-existent. What's fun about it though is it's a byproduct of nuclear reactors that are the fission reactors.
But it's just like, it might never exist.
Yeah. But anyways, so I don't think that the fusion, like if we get them working that'd be great. But putting them on a spaceship is probably going to be really hard or doing anything power-wise with that. I think we're going to get at some point a lateral power source unlooked for. Much like nuclear power was actually a lateral power source unlooked for.
Well, I told you about just before we started the podcast that some researchers, apparently, this was on the Joe Rogan show, are using Nikola Tesla's technology to make engines with no moving parts.
Yeah.
And they're exploring branches of technology that haven't been explored in over 100 years.
Yeah.
So that could be this source that you're...
Yeah, so that could be one of them. But like, it's so lateral, we don't even like, we figure out how to basically extract chicken souls to like produce billions of kilojoules of power.
Or the natural resonance of the universe, and you just decrease it slightly to power something.
Yes, if you want to be more sci-fi.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess, yeah. I mean... Chicken souls is pretty... Well, I guess it's magical, I guess. I don't know.
Exactly. I was like saying extremely like unlooked for.
Well, how many people
technology.
are considering the resonance of the universe?
Probably not many, but I think more considering it than using chicken souls to power their car.
Yeah. I think the resonance universe might actually come to exist, though.
Yeah. Or even a far more likely one is opening up a Heisenberg uncertainty whatever, or a wormhole.
Einstein-Rosenberg bridge?
Yeah, Einstein-Rosenberg bridge.
Rosen? Einstein-Rose? Whatever. Yeah.
And anyways, opening up a wormhole or opening up a portal to a parallel dimension, and where you open up to just happens to be a huge amount of energy.
And then you have to get it somehow, though.
Well, you just act like in Malazan. You just open up and it goes BWAM!
Right, but that has to power your ship.
Yeah, well, it's shooting out electricity,
Oh,
so
I see.
you just have like Tesla coils.
Okay, I see.
And it goes sucks them up.
But then wouldn't if it was a portal, wouldn't it be pushing in its own universe, not in yours? So what you could do, actually, is you could put a wall in its way that was connected to your ship.
Yeah.
And it could push your ship from a different universe.
Yeah, that could work as well.
That'd be dangerous, but yeah.
Yeah, you could have that.
If it was a very small energy source, that could work, I guess, yeah.
I was more thinking it's like a reality of pure electricity, and then you just like put some rods into it.
But we already have that. We have solar sails, which is essentially the same idea in a much more reasonable sense.
I'm not thinking about using a push. It's like you're just harvesting electricity from it.
Right, but we don't have a harvesting method.
Well, we have lightning rods.
I guess.
Yeah, I'm saying this is a dimension of pure electricity.
Right, okay.
And we're just putting metal rods.
All right, you're going somewhere with this. Okay, let's okay.
Yeah, it's pure electricity.
Right, just, okay.
Yeah. So, anyways, they're lateral power, so different lateral technology. And technology in general, like you say, it's like, oh yeah, they did that. But a lot of the technology of the future is not looked for. Like, think about what's crazy right now, just to touch on, but not too much, is very popular is AI doing artwork. And we've known about it for a while, but it's exploded because it became open source. And so a bunch of companies decide to make money off it quickly, and other companies are trying to develop it more thoroughly. But this is sort of this thing that just exploded out of nowhere and is actually having a pretty big impact on people. And it's going to have more and more impact. Now, I think that it is currently a fad bubble, which will get more integrated into the way that people do computer art. And so instead of like, oh, isn't this crazy? This is all AI generated, AI generation, ooh, AI generation. I think it's just going to be, yeah, this is my art program. And I use this because that's sort of like, if you think about these AI algorithms in Photoshop, you can take a picture of a person, like you have the picture of your wedding proposal, and there's this construction worker in it scratching his belly. You can cut him out and then generate the background behind him. And some might say, well, true art would be having a picture without that guy there. And so where does that line lie? All that. So that's a technology that's sort of unlooked for. And even computers, I think to a certain extent, were unlooked for.
Well, they needed something to
do calculations.
Calculate submarines, I believe.
Yeah.
Submarine shots.
Yeah, but the onset wasn't to make computers. It was to have them for a function.
Right.
And then they took off doing things wildly beyond what people thought they would do. Like video games and...
I think why people are so fixated on the AI art is we had an idea about what AIs could and couldn't do. And art was firmly in the camp of something an AI will never do because AI has no soul. But I was watching Lex Friedman, and he's an AI researcher. Yeah. And he was talking about actually the hardest thing for AIs to do is manipulation. So, for example, picking up a cup and moving it over, or making a puzzle, like solving a puzzle.
Well, I kind of assumed that AIs can do art for a very long time because Data painted pictures. And it just made sense. I know there's an argument that Data is beyond an artificial intelligence. He's an intelligence, which I would agree with in characteristic, but...
But he's also not real. Like, he's fictional. And I think people had this concept of art is a sacred domain that computers will never enter, even if they can beat someone at chess.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So there's going to be technologies, though, that we don't see coming. Like, we're doing so much with quantum computing. This is actually one of the big ones, because we haven't hit quantum computing. We're, like, doing things to try to make it. Once you get a quantum computer to work, you can sort of use a quantum computer to tell you how to build the next better quantum computer. And what's even scarier than that for a lot of people is once you build a smart enough AI, you can use it to tell you how to build itself better. And then eventually it doesn't need you to tell you how to do it. It can just build itself. And there's this whole sci-fi trope, which happens time and time again. Sometimes it's, well, usually the AI attacks us, and either we're enslaved under it or we fight it back, and we're left over with the remnants. But one of the cooler ones I found was from that series I was telling you about, the Japanese one, which is the AIs, they made artificial intelligence, or like super intelligence, I guess, that then went ahead and created technology that humans can't even comprehend how to recreate. But even after they beat the AI in their war and made a peace agreement with them, they now have this super technology. Like, they have these spaceships that travel faster than light, and they can literally clone humans with like their own individual souls. And it's like, yeah, this is just technology the AI gave us. And so that's one of the reasons why you want to make the AI that has its own intelligence that can self-improve, is that it can go, oh yeah, all that math problems you're having with the nuclear fusion, here's how you do it. You guys are doing it completely wrong. Like, check this out. And they're like, okay. And so we spend a year building it. It's like, whoa, that's amazing. then you just hope that that AI doesn't go, all right, yeah, now you build this simple chemical add to the air, it'll make everyone immortal. You're like, oh, okay. And everyone dies.
So you want to be an aeronautics engineer.
But not yet.
Spaceships aren't cool.
Yeah.
Stuff's getting cooler.
Yes, things are getting cooler, and technology...
Looking for your thesis statement, I guess.
It's the thought is that, I don't go into some things with thesis statements. It's more of a goal to converse rather than...
Yeah, but what are you saying? Are you saying...
Well,
am I waiting for the conclusion of the aeronautics engineer? Or...
Well, the aeronautics engineer is technology isn't there yet for me to even bother trying to.
Right. So
I mean, I could try to develop that sort of thing, but I don't even know where I would begin. And a lot of people don't know where they'd begin.
So you want to be an aeronautics engineer, but stuff is kind of boring right now, and it's getting cool really fast. So you're gonna wait until it gets really cool.
Yeah, but even more the thought that technology is going beyond what anyone expects it to a lot of the time, and it's advancing in ways that people can't predict. So one of the main thoughts, actually, one of the points why I focus so much on this nuclear fission is that fusion. We are super focused on nuclear fusion and renewables right now.
And then something's going to come out of left field.
Yeah, we are devoting so much effort to it, and the same with rocket ships. That's why I say I don't want to bother. Is we're devoting so much, like Elon's SpaceX, like making these things land, they're reusable, making the fuel slightly more efficient, getting the mathematics all good, like doing all of these things. And this is a part of development, definitely is. However, the Wright brothers made a plane, and there's gliders before, but they made a plane that flew. And that sort of blew everything's socks off. And then a spaceship blew the socks off the Wright brothers' plane. And the car blows a lot of things out of the water.
So you're waiting for the next big thing.
I'm not waiting for it. It's more I know it's going to happen.
I'm excited for what it is.
I'm excited for what it is. And also, there's this desperation to develop a lot of these things when it comes to power. Of like, we need to get these renewable powers. And we need to fusion to a slight extent. But we really need to work on these renewables. Get solar, get wind everywhere. And put all development, all the work into that. And part of my thought is, well, yeah, it's good to develop these while we're working on them. However, the current power systems we have, I think they work to a certain extent, and I don't think they're going to kill us immediately. So, is there a third option that isn't this thing we've been trying to do for 25 years? That's never worked every 25 years. That also we could be working on or towards.
So, as I said before the start of the podcast, there's these people working on Tesla's stuff. They've been working on it for at least a decade, possibly longer.
Yeah.
And...
so that's very cool. That's like
they're about to open source it, and their initial studies, they were able to retrofit an internal combustion engine to go from 30% efficiency to 80% efficiency. So they can reuse the heat and the sound and everything that comes from it, put that back into the engine, bring it up from 30 to 80%, and that is incredible.
Yeah.
And what I find is really interesting is that you're able to combine the technologies like that.
Yeah.
If it's true, we'll see. And I was thinking about it because it's kind of mind-blowing. Like, this is the next big thing. We're going to have all this crazy stuff. Maybe the energy crisis will be solved right there. And who knows what else will become possible. There's also some studies being done on psychedelics where... there's been some studies...
we could get power from psychedelics.
For the last couple decades where they've been looking at the benefits of psychedelics. Like, prevents fear of death is the huge one. Prevents anxiety and depression. But there's always been talk of, you see these entities.
Yeah.
And so there's been a study done recently, this is from the Joe Rogan podcast as well, where they isolated the people with no presuppositions, ideally, and got them to describe their experience with the entities. What did they look like? What did they want? What were they saying? And then they collated them, and they were consistent. The entities appear to be the same. So that has some possibilities. Humans react the same to a drug in a very interesting way.
And so if we drug people up with these psychedelics, then we hang them upside down over a chicken coop, then the energy produced from their psychedelic experience can be used to power my spaceship so I can travel the stars.
Something like that. Or you can access an alternate universe, or you can contact entities that you can communicate with. Yeah. And they also talked about on the podcast how there's some research into telepathy, which was finding some non-statistical anomalies. So statistically impossible anomalies, essentially. Yeah. Or highly improbable. And even with telekinesis to some extent. But no, telekinesis wasn't one. That was hypothetical. But no, with telepathy they did find this. And that was also back when the government was, like, MK Ultra was researching this. They did find that with the shape drawing experiment. They were finding people with statistically improbable results. And so there's all these mind-blowing things. If aliens come down, they could give us something that would... And I was thinking about that, and let's say it all happens tomorrow. Aliens come down, we get these technologies, energy crisis is solved, world hunger is solved, we can travel the stars. It doesn't fix your life. It doesn't solve your depression. It doesn't solve your anxiety. It doesn't solve your damaged relationship with your friend.
Doesn't rescue your father from the belly of the whale.
Doesn't rescue your father from the belly of the whale. That's a good one. That's all there, still there. You still have to deal with that. And that's why I think Jordan Peterson's advice of clean your room is so important.
Oh, shit, you ruined it.
What?
If you didn't say the clean your own room, it could have ended on depressing philosophy.
No, I think it's...
Then you had to go and give hope. You had to tell people to clean their own room.
It's not even hope. It's just... I was thinking about this. The most mind-blowing... You know how disaster movies and Godzilla type movies, they always do a thing I don't like, where they focus on like a love triangle.
Yeah.
While there's like the world's ending or Godzilla's destroying a city. And I don't like it, but that's actually not wrong.
Yeah.
There is still the struggle of your relationship going on while the world's ending. It's all still going on. I think a lot of the appeal of these things is, well, it would be like when I was really depressed in university, I wanted a disaster to happen because it would be something to break me from my stupor, from my mold. It was like if someone gets hit by a car, then I can run over and help them and do something. Or if there's a nuclear war, then I can band together with people and we can struggle to survive, something like that. And I think that's something that a lot of people who don't like what they're in right now want. They want a revolution. They just any change is better than no change.
Or isekai.
Yeah, that's a more fantasy version of it.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of revolutionaries,
Yes,
like communists or SJWs, they want the world to change because they need their lives to change because they don't feel anything.
They need meaning.
They need meaning, and they need something to break them from this emptiness. Like they need a shock to the system. It's the only way they can feel, and they're desperate to feel. And whether that's a nuclear war or just fighting cops in the street, it gives you a purpose, and it gives you. But it's something that shakes you free. Like you get, you have to fight off zombies. You now have an excuse to be living a life. But I'm not sure if you actually get one because you still have to deal with all your problems. It's just you have more problems now. You have twice as many problems now.
And some of them are undead.
You're depressed and there's a zombie apocalypse.
Yeah.
That's really bad.
Well, maybe it'll help you get some exercise.
Well, one of the things that can cause depression is rumination. And a zombie apocalypse could help you with rumination.
Yeah.
Because you're less... This is something that extreme sports people, you often hear them say. They have really messed up minds. And they do it to just feel a moment of calm. Like they'll be mountain biking down like a cliff just so they're fully focused in the moment. There's a quote by Confucius, which I think...
You did it wrong.
Completely...
Confucius says...
eliminates psychology as a field. Because if you listen to it, it gets rid of like 95% of all their advice and lessons and whatnot. If you listen to it, this is the thing. You can read 1,000 self-help books. You can go to all the seminars and become the enlightened guru of Mount Hilajabawuda or whatever. But if you don't actually implement, then nothing's going to change. Right? You can be like, yeah, this is great. This is smart. This is wise. This is wisdom. It's like, yeah, but you actually have to use it. You have to do something with it. So it's very hard to implement. Yeah. Like... If your life's stuck, read a self-help book. It doesn't matter which one. They're all great. But only read one and implement it fully. I think that's really important. But what Confucius said was, if you look to the future, you'll be anxious. If you look to the past, you will be depressed.
If you look to the present,
you are calm.
You are calm?
Yeah.
I was going to say, you will see your soup.
No, and that's what mindfulness is in psychology. It's a way to prevent all sorts of things where you just say, okay, life sucks. I hate everything. Everything's a disaster and it's horrible. What's going on right now? What's going on right now? Mm-hmm. Like that fight I had with my wife. Is that happening right now? No. Is what's going on right now? And that's mindfulness. And it's a great way to help people
listening to these two weirdos.
All sorts of rumination. And I think it like eliminates a lot of... If you can implement it. And I think psychologists' job... I was thinking about this, like... I was feeling pretty bad a couple days ago, and I was thinking, I need someone to talk to. But the amount of people on Earth that would understand me is very low. Like, for this...
You can't understand my pain. I must draw it in artwork instead.
Yeah. yeah, like the amount of people that I can talk to about it is very low. And then the amount of people that want to hear about it are also very low. And then that intersection is even smaller. And then from that tiny group, the amount of people that have more experience than you in the topic is even smaller. Because you need to talk to someone that actually knows what they're doing, right?
Yeah.
And so I was thinking it'd be really nice to have like a mentor, right? Like, because...
Like maybe you need a coach of some sort who's experienced in life.
No, you want someone who's wise, like a mentor.
Yeah.
And mentorship, it is a thing. I know people with mentors. I know a ornithologist who has an ornithologist mentor. Like there's sort of like a parent that is, but like a tradesman parent almost. And the closest I've ever come to someone like that would be my piano teacher. And we're nowhere close enough for me to consider him my mentor. But that would be the closest. I noticed actually that I do some weird things, like when I'm cooking and doing other things, I'm like, bum, 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 bum. I'm like, wait, I'm just copying my piano teacher. Like, he's probably had more influence on me than any adult other than my best friend's mom and our parents. And so I copy his habits, I noticed. And I was thinking that like a mentor would be great for helping people through their lives. And there's this huge preponderance of psychologists. Like it said that the richer people get, the more psychologists they have are in that area.
Yeah.
And I wonder if mentorship used to be more common because you had to go to the shepherd to learn how to be a shepherd. You had to, like, there was always something you were doing. Like the medieval thing was that you would, when you were 14, you'd go and move in with like a new family that was like 22 or something, and they would raise you until you were old enough to move out and do it again. So you're their house servant basically, and they showed you the ropes until you moved out and you started the cycle again. And so I wonder if a therapist, like a psychotherapist, is just a substitution for a mentor. And they shouldn't really be looking at like, okay, we'll use behavioral therapy, we'll use CBT, we'll use DBT, we'll use humanism, we'll use positivism.
We'll use pot.
Instead, they should just be that person that you can go to who's wiser than you, and you can say, and that's what they are typically, right? But you go to them and you say like, here's what's going on, and they go, yeah. And the thing about most of it is, in theory, they don't actually need to have an answer for you. They often shouldn't. They just need to be there to listen. And why you can't just go to most people to listen is you don't have any friends. No, it's...
No, look, that is a problem.
That is a problem. That is a problem.
I was talking with another friend of mine. We had a talk a few days ago. And they're saying, I think therapy can benefit a lot of people. And I said, I think that a lot of people can benefit from just having friends.
No, that's definitely true.
And then they're like, yeah, no, I see that, and my boyfriend also thinks that.
No, that's definitely true. But it's also not all of your friends, even if you have a lot of them, are equipped to listen. Because listening, especially in a way to help someone, is very hard.
Yeah.
And...
especially if they just talked about communism for 2 hours.
Yeah, well, look, I'm going to blame the writing of the book that made it hard for me to... like, I had my plan in mind, and then I started reading the pages to figure out where the paragraphs were I wanted to read, and it just all left my mind. Yeah. So I'm going to... No, I'll take responsibility. I should have written an essay. I was going to write an essay, and then I didn't, and then it turned out that I should have.
Yes, and I was right.
No, you said let's go ahead.
I said we can at your discretion.
I didn't hear that part.
Yeah, I gave you my advice and warning about my own work, and it was your discretion.
Well, I didn't hear that part.
Okay.
So I'm blaming you for not being clear enough in your speech. Or, if your speech was clear, for not understanding that I wouldn't listen. So one thing you can really do as well is take responsibility.
Yes, I take responsibility for that as well. I should have gone, no!
Yeah. I think taking responsibility is the only way to grow. So you should be responsible. You should take responsibility for not communicating to me that it was at my own discretion.
Yes.
Yeah, so I was just thinking with all this technology, it's very exciting, very cool. And it means nothing to... But I think there's a beauty in all of it. Like there's this human... We love discovery, right?
Yes.
And I think art can heal us, and I think that discovery is a form of art, and there could, to be less cynical, I guess, I think there would be a healing aspect to this stuff. But I also think, like, the energy crisis, right?
Yeah.
if it is a crisis, because let's say there's stuff that's been behind the scenes this whole time that'll solve it tomorrow. Then what were you up in a tiffy about? Well,
Yeah.
and why were you up in a tiffy in the first place? Either way, like, either the crisis is there, it's not why are you up in a tiffy. And I think it might be an excuse to not clean your room.
Yeah.
Like, how can I clean my room when there's going to be spaceships tomorrow?
Well,
or the world is dying and the planet is dying.
there's that whole Zen saying, which is, there's the praise Buddha. That's more Buddhism. It follows also the line of clean your room.
Before enlightenment, I cut wood and carried water.
Yeah.
After enlightenment, I cut wood and carried water.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But even there's a war going on outside. Cut wood and carry water.
Yeah. Well, you still have to. You still need
Yeah.
to drink and you still need heat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There is utopia. Cut wood, carry water.
And I don't know if I appropriated your technological talk right.
No.
Because it just did remind me how I was super excited for this Tesla technology, if it's real. And the reason why I keep saying if it's real is because it's such an extraordinary claim,
Yeah.
requires extraordinary evidence. And people like Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock have been ridiculed for so long by mainstream science that I think that makes them vulnerable to con artists who could tell them they've come up with an amazing technology that they will reveal to them.
Yeah.
And use that to their own advantage. Now, Randall Carlson's a very smart guy, and he's read the patents,
Yeah.
and he thinks they make sense. So
Now, see, where I actually think this space technology goes, and the psychedelics will probably help us, is that freaking book with the people in the green bathtubs. The manuscript you gave me.
oh, the Voynich manuscript.
Yeah.
It'll explain that finally.
Yeah.
Well, why this excites me as well is Tesla's work was based on...
Well, I think that the Voynich manuscript, though, has the spaceship technology in it. We just need to understand it. Because those are spaceships in the Voynich manuscript. That is explaining spaceships in medieval terms. That is what those pictures are.
I think it might be herbology, but
No, it's spaceships. Those plants are the compositions of elements.
I think
Yes, please.
there's a part of... Graham Hancock talks about this a lot. We're a species with amnesia. There was a great disaster and we lost something.
Yes.
And I think psychedelics might be what we lost, and sacred geometry. This is just...
Spaceships.
Maybe. There might be an aspect, because we do love exploration. There is an aspect to that.
Yeah, that's why I want to do the aerospace. It's not like making spaceships would be fun, but Mies wants to see other planets.
One thing that I do think the benefit of the Tesla stuff is if we could reconnect with our ancestors, we might stop being so listless. And we have a meaning crisis on. I think that's fairly fair to say.
Yes.
And the answer could be finding the meaning. And there might actually be a way to do that. Like an objective way to find meaning.
Mm-hmm.
Psychedelics, for the people that have experienced it, does seem to be that for most of them. But if you could glimpse... I think there's something really important in... So let's say they make this motionless Tesla engine. It looks like a little pyramid. And we realize that the pyramid is a giant engine. Something like that.
Yeah.
What that says is you were arrogant and you didn't realize that there is so much more to the world than you thought, and your nihilism and your existential crisis and your lack of meaning is based on rationalism, the arrogant work of the devil that grants you much power, but it leads you to believe that you know that everything will go wrong. 2017. Don't remember what happened exactly. I just kept having conversations with our dad and making me miserable. And he just kept wanting to have them. And I felt like I was going insane because he just kept repeating the same thing over and over again. And I think looking for sense in that was my mistake. He was looking for some answer, I don't know what, but he was on a completely different track than I was, obviously. And the fact that I didn't recognize that, and he didn't recognize that, meant that it seemed like I was talking to an insane person. Or a wall or something like that. It's like if someone keeps trying to catch you out in a lie to prove that you've been stealing, and you've never stolen in your life, and you think you're having a conversation about like Star Trek, then you're going to be very confused when they keep saying like, yeah, but why don't you like Worf? And you're like, I do like Worf. And I'm like, oh yeah, well, prove it. Well, why don't you like it? And you're like, what's going on here? Because they're trying to catch you out in a lie about stealing or something, let's say.
Yeah.
And that made me very upset, and I ended up at the worst point in my life, just curled up in a ball in the middle of the night outside, just completely awash with emotion. Don't even know if I was able to cry. I was just so upset. And in that moment, I knew, I think I've talked about this before, with absolute certainty that nothing would ever get better, and it would just keep getting worse. And I was wrong. And I think that's where arrogance leads, right? Because you think, well...
You think you know something.
Yeah, everything's gotten worse so far, therefore it'll always get worse. Or you think everything's gotten worse even if it hasn't.
Yeah.
Because sometimes you can't tell if something's good or bad. Most of the time you can't tell if something's good or bad. Even when it's in your own mind. Because this is the leading idea, and it makes a lot of sense, is that emotions are determined after reactions. So you feel a strong affect, and then you say, oh, that is this emotion, like fear or love. And so if you have I think I have this little problem with your mind, you'll feel uneasy. Like I was playing Skyrim today, and I felt a bit uneasy. And I was like, what am I upset about? I was like, wait, I think my brain's just sending a dud signal, and I'm trying to account for it. Because there's nothing to be anxious or upset or stressed or whatever in this moment right now. I'm just playing this game.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, like my life might have issues going on, but in this moment playing this game, this is just a dud signal.
Yeah.
And I think okay, boom, we've got a wormhole. It's like, oh, okay, maybe I don't know everything. Now, I think the problem with the wormhole is it just feels so possible.
I think you have a slightly different take on that than me, because I go, ah!
I just think, it's about time. Now, if you could, smoke ayahuasca, and it created a wormhole, and it turned out that's how the Aztecs traveled around the world, collecting sacrifices, that would be something.
Yes, that would be.
And
you ingest ayahuasca, not smoke it.
Well, that's what we've been doing wrong this whole time, obviously. We thought it was a drink, but it's not, and that's why we can't teleport and sacrifice people. I think, and it doesn't have to be drugs. I'm just saying we have a preconceived notion about something, and it's shown to be wrong. Yeah. And it happens all the time, and we adapt instantly.
Yeah.
It's like...
Well, have you ever driven a vehicle you've never driven before? And you're like...
Whoa! And then,
you're uncertain about it, and then, maybe a day later... You're just like, wow.
I was watching a show from 2001, and they were mocking, the whole show, the joke of 15-minute show was derision of the idea of aliens existing. And the military 2 years ago said, yeah, there's UFOs. We don't know what they are, but there's UFOs. And the show was also like, UFOs, crazy, stupid. Yeah. And Bigfoot's like that today, but it's getting less so and less so. Even if it never comes true. It is getting more accepted, I think. And now there's aliens, and it's like, okay, now the world isn't arrogant because we realized we were totally wrong for 70 years. It's like, no, we're just back to, we're like, yeah, there's aliens, so, or there's UFOs, so.
Yes.
We just instantly adjust.
We do not know what we do not know.
It's very hard to stop being arrogant.
Yes.
I'm arrogant all the time, and we're all arrogant. Well, maybe, I'm not going to account, maybe there's people out there that
Speak for yourself.
Yeah, I'll only speak for myself. I'm arrogant all the time.
I am only arrogant when I should be.
All right, and this might end up being a short episode because we've got to go because I used up 2.5 hours talking about communism in a really bad way. Well, it might not be bad. I saw an author, he said, never give your opinion on your own work because that might be the part people enjoy most.
Yes.
And then you're ruining it for them. So, I'll just say it was a learning experience, good or bad. Yeah. All right. Goodbye. Take care.